Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Get lost, you witch. Don't even think about letting me have a baby with you again. Chapter 41. The great writer surnamed Lu once said, "No one can be happy forever. No matter how happy you are, it is only temporary." Listening to the slight crying in the room, Li Qingming never expected that the beating that the little guy had finally escaped would be realized in such a way when he was caught off guard. "Okay. Why are you messing with that witch like your mother-in-law?" Li Qingming felt distressed and helpless. He couldn't even push the door open, let alone talk about whether to go in or not. The only thing that gave him some peace of mind was the so-called lesson from the witch. In fact, it was like a mosquito bite to the little guy, and even the pain was only very slight for a short moment. Crying a lot is a child's natural tendency to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. Even so, I still can't help but feel heartbroken when I hear it. After a while, the door opened, and the little guy who was crying and licking his tears jumped directly into Li Qingming's arms, feeling aggrieved. "Ah, Daddy." Li Qingming wiped away her tears and patted her back to comfort her. "My father, I will give you a good scolding next time. How dare you hit you like this? Really?" When the little guy heard this, he cried even louder and cried mournfully, then remembered to spank her harder, both left and right. Li Qingming did not dare to respond, and took a step away from the study. If you want to say something bad, you have to say it behind Pei Zinan's back. If you say it to his face, won't you continue to seek beatings? Fortunately, the little guy's mood came and went quickly, and soon he was happily pestering Li Qingming to draw pictures for her. "Aren't you sad?" Li Qingming also found it interesting. He was still crying just now, but now he is laughing happier than anyone else. "Sad?" The little guy blinked his eyes, shook his head and said, "You're not sad. The one who was beaten was the little guy just now, and it has nothing to do with me now." Now it was Li Qingming's turn to be stunned. How could he still have such a train of thought? Is my daughter really a genius? Daddy, Daddy, Pei Zulu suddenly lowered his voice and whispered in Li Qingming's ear, "Can you draw another picture of Sister Piao Niang? I will secretly give it to her then." After being beaten, her desire to find a new wife for Li Qingming became even stronger. Li Qingming smacked his lips and asked, "Aren't you afraid that your mother-in-law will spank you again?" "Why are you afraid? It will be me who will be beaten in the future, not me now." Pei Zulu responded in an orderly manner, and looked at Li Qingming with confused eyes like, "Dad, why don't you even understand this?" Li Qingming felt a little itchy in his head and thought that he should establish a correct understanding for the little guy. "Then do you know what will happen if your mother-in-law finds out?" "No, it won't be possible." The little guy's tone suddenly weakened. "What will happen if your mother-in-law finds out?" Li Qingming repeated. "I will be discovered by my mother-in-law." Pei Zulu's eyes were wandering, and he did not dare to look directly into Li Qingming's eyes. Finally, he rolled over in his arms and rubbed his head here and there. He said with great enthusiasm, "As long as Dad is here, I'm not afraid of anything. Painting, must paint." One sentence captured Li Qingming's heart again, causing him to draw a portrait of Zhang Yunqing in twos and handed it to the little guy to carefully put it into his storage treasure. "This is a gift she gave to bribe the new mother-in-law, so she must keep it well. By the way, Dad," the satisfied Pei Zulu remembered other things, "can you draw another painting of Grandpa Fu and I can give it to him?" Li Qingming paused for a moment and looked at the little guy with increasingly doting eyes. He was so close to Uncle Fu and hadn't thought of this yet, but she, the little one, was thinking about him. After a while, the little guy holding the portrait trotted all the way to the courtyard next door. Grandpa Fu, Grandpa Fu. Hey, why is Shaoluer here?" Uncle Fu, who was chopping wood with a rusty hatchet in the courtyard, heard this. He quickly put down the knife, wiped his hands, and then picked up the little guy running towards him. "My father drew a painting for Grandpa Fu, and I sent it to Grandpa Fu." Pei Zulu spread out the drawing paper as if he was offering a treasure. "Does Grandpa Fu still like it?" "I like it, I like it." Uncle Fu smiled with his old face like a blooming chrysanthemum. At his age, let alone the painting painted by Li Qingming himself, even if the little guy picked up a stone from the roadside, Uncle Fu still really liked it. That's good, that's good." The little guy rolled his big eyes and asked tentatively, "Grandpa Fu, who are the pretty and well-behaved sisters in Jojo Palace. She didn't come here just to find out who else was suitable to be her father's mother-in-law. Although Uncle Fu couldn't figure out why the little guy would ask such a question, and just regarded it as a child's curiosity, he still answered seriously, in terms of appearance, my young lady and Zhang Yunqing of the Zhang family should be the first. Quote. Miss. The little guy blinked curiously. She already knew Zhang Yunqing, but she was not familiar with this young lady. Uncle Fu smiled and scratched Pei Zulu's nose. That's your father's master, our peak master of Xian Peak, Yu Baiwei. Abba's teacher, master. Pei Zulu's eyes suddenly brightened a few degrees. His master became his mother-in-law. That was either. Kiss even more. This is really, really great. Grandpa Fu, Grandpa Fu. The little guy asked again. This Yu Bai, what are the names of Sister Bai Wei Piaoniang? After learning calligraphy from Li Qingming for a period of time, she gradually developed the habit of asking for glyphs, not to mention that this was Sister Piaoniang whom she was planning to call to be her father's mother-in-law. You have to ask her clearly. When the time comes, I will ask my father to draw a portrait for her, and I will write her name in person and send it to you. How sincere it is. Pei Zulu thought everything over in the blink of an eye, and he felt very happy. I only thought of Li Qingming hugging her hard, kissing her and praising her. Of course, it was impossible for Uncle Fu to think of going to this floor. It was only separated from Li Qingming's courtyard by a wall. He had never used his spiritual consciousness to pry into it. Instead, he really regarded himself as an old housekeeper in the mortal world. At this time, after hearing the little guy's words, I was also very happy. I went back to more than 10 years ago in a trance, when Master Qingming was just able to run away, but he was still lingering behind his young lady every day. Instead of shouting, Master, he would shout, Sister Baiwei, and Sister Yu, all day and night. The older one and the younger one were exactly the right father and daughter. If we count the seniority, the little guy is also the disciple of her young lady. Xian Peak is already a bit depleted of people. Young Master Qingming, who had high hopes for him, is now living at the bottom of the valley. Fortunately, he has this little guy. When his young lady returns, Xian Peak will finally be able to do so after so many years. It's lively. And based on the cuteness of the little guy, I think the young lady from his family will definitely like him. The most important thing is that with Yu Baiwei's character, I am afraid that in the future, she will be dedicated to seeking the truth and will not care about the love between men and women. Uncle Fu has always been clinging to this. There are worries. Nowadays, regardless of human ethics, it is more suitable to regard her as a successor of the mantle. She does not have the name of an adopted daughter, but she has the reality of being an adopted daughter. Good, great good. After thinking about it together, Uncle Fu felt a little more indescribable joy and wrote Yu Baiwei's name on the sand beside him with a smile. The fish is the same as the sweet and sour fish we had last time. White is the color of these rose-like flowers. Uncle Fu selected a few more white roses, wiped off the small thorns on the branches, handed them to the little guy, and then said, Wei, it's the name of this rose. The word, sao, is at the top, and the word, slight, is at the bottom. Older people are better able to know how to guide young children's cognition. After receiving the fragrant white rose, the little guy immediately remembered the name. Chiangwei, Sister Bai Wei, Pei Zulu repeated in his mouth to reinforce the impression, looked at Bai Chiangwei in his hand, and couldn't help but said, Bai Wei, sister must be very pretty, right? Quote. Of course, Uncle Fu also showed the expression on Li Qingming's face when he was always very proud of the little one. There is no woman in the world who is more beautiful than my young lady. Only that devil a few people, including the door demon girl, are equally divided. If you are on par with my mother-in-law, what color would you rate? After roughly understanding this sentence, Pei Zulu's little eyes became much wider and his upturned eyelashes almost touched his eyelids. He felt indescribable satisfaction and a touch of guilt in his heart. It seems that Sister Yunqing has to wait in the back row. After Fu Bo's words, Yu Baiwei, the sister she has not yet met, has become her best choice as a new mother-in-law, even more suitable than Zhang Yunqing who came first. In fact, there is another very important consideration standard. Who said that the youthfulness of the noble daughter of the Zhang family has not faded yet? Not to mention whether her father can drink Nana together, she may not be able to drink enough by herself. I, Pei Zulu, am very loyal. That word comes out like a wave of sky. A wave of clouds, Pei Zulu. What are you doing at Grandpa Fu's place? Are you having so much fun? When Pei Zulu returned to his yard, Li Qingming was also surprised by the smile on her face. Shish. Unexpectedly, the little guy made a silent gesture mysteriously. He looked around to find Pei Zenon's figure, rubbed his little butt, and then raised his hands to cross and draw a big circle. I prepared a big gift for my father, Pei Zulu said 4 big words in a row, and then emphasized, a very big gift. Really? Li Qingming was pleasantly surprised. Most of them were sincere, and a small part were deliberately exaggerated. This kind of response can make the little guy happier. Of course, seeing how surprised Li Qingming was, Pei Zulu couldn't help but put his hands on his hips, and the fox tail behind him swayed like a full-tailed dandelion in full bloom. What a big surprise. Can you tell Dad now? Li Qingming picked her up. You can't do it now. Pei Zulu pretended to blink at Li Qingming. He blinked several times in a row, sometimes with both eyes at the same time, sometimes with the left eye moving and the right ear motionless, and sometimes the other way around. Li Qingming was stunned for a moment, and then he realized that the little guy was afraid that the wall had ears, and was playing with his eyes, so he nodded and said, I understand. That's good. Pei Zulu let out a long sigh of relief like a grown-up. This is a little secret between my father and I. Good. Then pull the hook. Good. Li Qingming didn't understand the code words the little guy sent to him, and didn't care. What should I do if my daughter gets tired of blinking all the time? Can Dad take you out to watch a show today? He asked. Look, watch a show. It's just to act out the story in the picture book on the stage and sing it to others. Okay. Pei Zulu didn't particularly like to do anything before, and she didn't particularly dislike anything, but now it's all about her father, Li Qingming, and she likes everything. But when Li Qingming was about to carry her out, Pei Zulu moved a few times and said, Wait, Dad, wait. Li Qingming felt strange, but he put her on the ground and watched her run into the room. After a while, she changed into an extremely loose tutu and put on a rather large sun hat. Li Qingming knew that she was doing this to cover up the fox characteristics on her body. But the more this happened, the more Li Qingming felt sad. The little guy's sensibleness made him feel heartfelt. Dad, squat down quickly. The little guy ran to Li Qingming and stopped before speaking again. Li Qingming did as he was told. Just when he was about to say something, he found that the little guy stood up on tiptoes and took off the fox-eared headband he had been wearing on his head. All right. The little guy clapped his hands and turned around to see Li Qingming pursed her lips and said nothing, but with a touch of sadness lingering on her face. She once again held her father's face like a little adult and comforted. It'll be fine if Daddy is at home and coaxes me. If I go outside and someone talks about my father, I will be heartbroken to death. When you are young, you don't understand anything. But many times, I can understand everything. Pei Zulu knew how kind her father Li Qingming was to her and how much he loved her. He also understood that he and Uncle Fu had been wearing the fox-eared headbands for the past 2 days, all to comfort her and not want to see her sad. Pei Zulu understands everything, so I was really happy, so happy that I wanted to cry. But his father had done so much just not to see her cry again, so how could he cry because of this? She knew even more clearly that if a grown man like Li Qingming wore this pink fox-eared headband, he would definitely attract criticism from others. She was afraid that she would be criticized because of her fox ears. But she didn't even want to see Li Qingming suffer criticism because of her. Li Qingming felt sorry for her as his daughter, so how could Pei Zulu not feel sorry for him? Li Qingming understands everything the little guy is thinking, but since he has become her father, he should fulfill his corresponding responsibilities. He put the hairband in the little guy's hand back on her head, rubbed her head, and said nonchalantly, "Say what you want, I don't know how many people will say that Dad's hairband is beautiful. If you take off your hat, it will be like complimenting your fox ears." Pei Zulu pursed her lips. She was not stupid, but occasionally a little stupid. She didn't believe what Li Qingming said, but she was so moved when she heard it. Li Qingming just picked her up, and Pei Zulu couldn't help but rub his cheek against the side of his face. Dad, I really miss you. So is Dad. The atmosphere was so warm, but when he walked out the door, the little guy felt very cramped and lost the excitement and curiosity of the previous times. Dad, why are there more people on the street than usual today? It's not much different. Li Qingming told a little lie. Is this so? Whenever she passed by passers-by or stalls, she would always raise her fox ears under her hat and listen carefully. Haha, isn't that the true legend of Jojo Palace who was in trouble? Why are you wearing such a nondescript hairband? I really don't know how the reputation was spread in the past. How can such a grown man dress up like a woman? It's really indecent. Is it possible that this Li Junjuan has lost his mind and gone crazy? Quote. These gossips, every sentence and every word, are like the cockleburr that Pei Zulu accidentally stuck on the tail of a fox some time ago. He feels uncomfortable when he looks at it, and it hurts when he pulls it out. Slight, but profound. Although there were a few compliments occasionally, they could not wash away the cockleburrs. Instead, they made the slight pain even more uncomfortable for her. Even the candied haws that Li Qingming handed over to her, she only held it in her hand and did not touch it. Take a bite. Dad. Can we go home? Pei Zulu hugged Li Qingming's neck, his hat lowered than before. The low one is actually not a hat. I haven't watched the show yet. I'll come back after watching it. Li Qingming knew why his daughter was lost, but running away would never solve any problem. Facing and solving is the only correct way to deal with suffering. Okay, I'll watch the show with Dad. Pei Zulu leaned in Li Qingming's arms, without crying, but quietly took off the large sun hat on his head. She doesn't want her father to be talked about alone. When Li Qingming saw this scene, he was shocked and felt warm in his heart. He even felt like his old father wanted to cry. Doting on their daughters can bring great satisfaction to some fathers, but if the little cotton-padded jacket knows how to be considerate and caring about them at a young age, they will go back to the room and drop the little pearls without turning around. This kind of tears is more real than the sight of a young man with dyed yellow hair riding a motorcycle with his daughter. But how could a character like Li Qingming make his daughter suffer any grievances? The wilting little guy suddenly raised his head, his big eyes widened, and he was so surprised that he couldn't say a complete sentence. Daddy, then. What? Li Qingming pretended to be confused, followed the direction of the little guy's gaze, and saw several young women who were also wearing fox-eared headbands. They also wear fox ears. Pei Zulu half covered his mouth and said, for fear of speaking too loudly, are they also fox monsters? After saying that, Pei Zulu felt it carefully again. Well, she couldn't tell. So Pei Zulu could only look at Li Qingming for help. They are all monks. But the answer left Pei Zulu confused. Why does a good monk wear fox ears like her father? He's not familiar with them either. Pei Zulu didn't know that during the few days she was asleep, her father Li Qingming almost caused several earthquakes in Linan City. With the release of The Legend of White Snake, it caused great controversy in just half a day. I love it so much that I have read the newly released volumes many times during this period of time. This kind of story of grudges and hatreds between humans and monsters is really novel, and no one has ever written it so captivatingly. While it makes people feel novel, it also arouses disgust from some people. How can a defeated general like the demon who was driven to the secret realm by the ancestors of the human race achieve righteousness with mortals and not bring harm to the world? But Bai Susan in the story doesn't look like a monster at all. She is more like a bodhisattva than a bodhisattva. Even Xiao Qing, who seems to be arrogant, is actually very kind-hearted. Both positive and negative, this quarrel directly pushed this story to the forefront. Almost everyone in the city was discussing it. It didn't take long for everyone to basically know the plot, whether they liked it or disliked it. And with the merger of two old theaters in the city, a play of A Chinese Ghost Story was put on, which directly pushed this wave to the top and exploded instantly. The chivalrous and righteous Yan Chixia, the clumsy and honest scholar Ning Kaichen, the kind-hearted fox demon Ni Xiaochen, and the evil-doing three old demons have all become their after-dinner tea conversations. Compared with The Legend of White Snake, the emotions of A Chinese Ghost Story are more entangled and impressive. Coupled with the performances of those troupes, the audio and tangible stage can bring different sensory stimulations to people, especially for the female group, whether they liked it or were bored before, now they all resonate. Look, Bai Susan is such a monster. Look, Ni Xiaochen is such a kind demon. But the results are so miserable. Emotions resonate and are contagious. Just like in the era when the internet is popular, trends and hotspots can be changed by the people behind them. In just a few days, the trend of transvestite love has emerged. First of all, the legend of White Snake was sold out, and it was difficult for practitioners to meet the demand in time even with the methods of practitioners. Even Liao Jai, with the original story of A Chinese Ghost Story, was sold out. As for the theater where A Chinese Ghost Story is being performed, it is in full swing. There are more spectators in one theater than in the rest of Lenan City combined, and it even attracts many people from outside the city, such as casual cultivators. This is why the streets are crowded. The fox-eared headband that Li Qingming asked Chen Yayan to make early in the morning has become the most popular decoration for women today. Even the fox-tailed love toys that she designed by analogy have been snapped up by those women. Those beauties from the land of fireworks went straight up and down, pretending to be fox demons themselves to attract customers. This city can be said to have all taken on the shape of Ni Xiaochen. Pei Zulu's expression became more and more confused as he looked at it. As Li Qingming walked forward, more and more people wearing fox-eared headbands appeared on the road. And when she squeezed into the theater, she was covered with densely packed fox ears from top to bottom. For those who didn't know, she thought she was in a fox den. At this moment, two female monks who were walking together saw them and couldn't help but stepped forward and asked, "Little girl, where did you buy these fox ears? Why do they look so good?" Pei Zulu was stunned, then locked himself in Li Qingming's arms, covered his fox ears with his hands, and said dully, "Don't you feel ugly?" Quote. This appearance immediately made the two young female monks cover their mouths and laugh. "What's ugly? It's beautiful. How can these fox ears not be beautiful?" The female monk who spoke first moved her fox ears, looking very youthful. "They are so cute." The female companion next to her also chatted, and then said, "It's just ours, they're not as good looking as yours, little girl." Pei Zulu was so stunned when he heard this, his eyes gradually brightened, as if he had fallen into several gorgeous galaxies. She did not look at the two female monks, but stared at Li Qingming clearly. Her father really didn't lie to her. Li Qingming smiled slightly, persuaded the two female monks to leave, and then rubbed Pei Zulu's head. He wanted to let the little guy know, in this world, besides Daddy, there are many people who like you. But the little guy, whose eyes were already red, just hugged Li Qingming tightly and said as if crying, "The little one only needs one daddy. When I was still young, I was always greedy and wanted to stuff all the fun and delicious food in the world into my room. At the same time, it is easier to satisfy than anything else." The same is true for Pei Zulu. She was greedy for fun, gluttony for food, and lust for sleep. She was greedy for every minute and every second around Li Qingming, wishing she could turn every minute and second into a unit that would last for eternity. But whether it was Li Qingming's soft call to her, a touch, or the doting look every time he held him in his arms, Pei Zulu could be drowned in this sincere emotion. Just as she cried out at this time, "The world is very big for her, but her little one only needs her father Li Qingming." While Li Qingming comforted him with his palms, he saw Pei Zulu slowly regaining his mood and leaning into his arms with a blushing face. He finally completely loosened the string that had been hanging tightly in his heart, and the boulder hanging under the string also rolled away. Fallen into slag. Scars from childhood often take a lifetime to heal. It can be cured, but it cannot be erased. He only hoped that Pei Zulu would have more than enough joy in his life and be a carefree little guy forever. Isn't that what being a father is like? Dad, they seem to like wearing fox ears. After crying, Pei Zulu had her usual innocent smile again. She turned around, put her hands on Li Qingming's shoulders, and only half of her head was exposed. She looked left and right, with her two fox ears standing straight, reflecting her focused state at this time. The world of children is always so simple. Not only those women, there are also many men in the theater who wear fox ear headbands like her father. It's just that the smiles on their faces are not as handsome as her father's, and some of them are cold-faced and silent. On the contrary, the female companions next to them all smile brightly. Everyone must like such cute fox ears. Li Qingming responded, and asked shopkeeper Lu Da, who was smiling like a mouse, to go up to the highest attic of the theater. Having accomplished such a great achievement in just a few days, shopkeeper Lu seemed to be glowing with the second spring of his life. Not only did he walk with his back straight, but he even walked as if he was carrying the wind. Apart from joy, I have never forgotten whose hand this scene was created. I heard that Li Qingming was going to bring his daughter here today, but she had been waiting in front of the door for more than an hour, and now she was even flattering, "My boss, it's really nice for our lady to wear these fox ears. The whole Lan'an city is also looking for her. There is no other girl who is more agile than Miss." As a father, this kind of flattery works better than anything else. Suddenly hearing this compliment, the little one's eyes rolled up and she almost couldn't help but giggle. However, she still couldn't let go in front of strangers, so she only moved her ears. And those big eyes stared at the somewhat ugly shopkeeper Lu Da, who had small eyes but good taste. "Little guy, this is shopkeeper Lu." Li Qingming said something, and Pei Zulu immediately spoke obediently, but the person he called was not the shopkeeper, but, "Hello, Grandpa Lu." For someone with such a vision, calling him Grandpa was not an exaggeration. As for shopkeeper Lu, he was a little confused when he was called Grandpa. How could he be worthy of being called Grandpa? If we talk about his mood, it was far more exciting than when his eldest grandson called him Grandpa for the first time. "Hello, hello," shopkeeper Lu responded a little awkwardly. He wanted to maintain a calm expression, but he couldn't hold his mouth shut. His old face smiled funny but kindly. Even the rumblings of complaints downstairs seemed to have no meaning. "Shopkeeper, when will your show start? Old Lu, who gave birth to a grandson without an asshole, I advise you to be more sensible. I have been waiting for this drama for long enough. Refund the ticket. I want a refund." The crowd was noisy, everyone was urging the game to start. Shopkeeper Lu bowed out of the attic reserved for Li Qingming. As soon as he walked out, he cursed, "What a bunch of ungrateful fools. I should double the ticket price." If it weren't for Li Qingming's request, he would not let go of this big hen that can only lay golden eggs and squeeze out a wave of spiritual stones from these people's pockets. But who told his boss to spend so much effort just for the little fox girl in his arms? Although Lao Zongda's cultivation level is mediocre, the eyesight he developed during his travels in his youth can be called vicious. He can tell at a glance that the little guy really has the blood of a fox demon, and his pair of fox ears are really warm. Hot, it's different from others. But it's not a big deal. He wouldn't be surprised even if Li Qingming raised a fox saint in his family. Matching my boss, tisk. I just have to do it. Suppressing the chaotic thoughts in his heart, shopkeeper Lu had already arrived backstage, clapped his hands and said, "Everyone, secretly filming, this old man really needs you to be more considerate. Our boss is waiting for us to put on a good show in the attic." Those in the backstage who had a good reputation in the city and were recruited by shopkeeper Lu were also shocked. Although these actors are first class, they are only among the ninth-rate people. No matter how famous they are, they still have the same status as pigs and dogs. They only seek fame and fortune, and rarely for anything else. After coming here, Ling Shi made enough money to build a house, and his reputation spread thousands of miles, all thanks to the help of his boss. But who knows how many good things this boss has in store, and who knows if these people will be replaced by others if they don't work harder. As the gongs and drums played, these actors also came on stage one by one. Thunderous cheers suddenly sounded from all directions under the stage. Although the stage was built in the center of the venue, there were also huge crystal stones around it that projected the scene on the stage, making it look like a large-scale concert. But in every aspect, they are much more advanced than those in Li Qingming's previous life. They can become immortals and make it look like a feudal society. Isn't that embarrassing? Daddy, Daddy, the show has begun. Pei Zulu, who had to lie down in front of the railing early, shouted loudly. She had never seen such a scene before. She thought it was very novel and interesting. Even the spectators who were crowded together in the stands were also enjoying it. After watching it happily, she sat down in Li Qingming's arms again and asked, "Daddy, Daddy, what is this play about?" "Well, is it the Ni Xiaochen story I told you before?" Then, the story of the fox demon and the scholar. Pei Zulu still remembered it somewhat. It's the fox demon who cooks, washes, and gives birth to children for the scholar, Li Qingming joked. After he changed the play, in addition to the love and resentment, there was also more interaction between the male and female protagonists. Ooh, they are both fox monsters, so why are they so different? The little guy nodded, thinking silently in his heart, and then came up with an extremely bold idea. She wants to look good, go back and teach her mother-in-law. How can I be a mother-in-law like you? The actors on the stage are experiencing the life of the characters in the play. The spectators in the audience were enjoying the various performances performed by the actors. Pei Zulu, who was sitting in the attic, took out a small book as big as her palm from nowhere. She was reading and writing while mumbling something. That's right, isn't that what you should do when you are a mother-in-law? Wash the laundry, chop wood, do the cooking. Write it down, take it back and show it to my mother-in-law. Most children of this age cannot understand the romance, hatred between country and family in those TV dramas. They can only distinguish some simple things about what is good and what is bad, but they can always find their own unique perspective to understand it. In the eyes of the little guy, this drama is just like running away from home. And that gentleman named Chen is not as good as her. Not only was she lost and hungry, but she also had to sleep in a cold ruined temple. She was not as smart as she was before. Fortunately, I met a fox demon with a beautiful heart and a kind heart. Only, except for not being as good looking as my mother-in-law, this Xiao Chen is 1,000 times better than my mother-in-law in every other aspect. 10,000 times. Pei Zulu secretly compared it. The former's gentleness and virtuousness could not be compared to her mother-in-law's appear on the body. On the contrary, she has seen it all over her father. I really feel sorry for Dad. Noticing the distress in the little guy's gaze towards him, Li Qingming was also confused and had no idea what was going on in his daughter's little head. Daddy, Pei Zulu, who did and said whatever he thought, was already lying in Li Qingming's arms again. It doesn't matter, anyway, she is good to my father and will find many new wives for him. Will Xiao Chen do the laundry service for that minister every day from now on? She asked. Li Qingming looked far away, and the plot on the stage had reached the stage where Ning Kaichen and Ni Xiaochen were determined to decide on each other's hearts for the rest of their lives. The former studied hard while the latter worked hard at housework, but they were in love. But the subsequent plot is not a sweet family episode, but all kinds of sadomasochistic entanglements. He shook his head. The two of us are about to separate. Ah, the little guy was arguing loudly, thinking that the two of them could live happily like this, just like in those stories. You can find out if you read further, Li Qingming said with a smile. In addition to writing homework for exams, it is always interesting to find other answers on your own. Pei Zulu nodded his chin and looked at it seriously again. Then the more he looked at the fox ears, the more they stretched. How come two people who seemed so good to each other separated like this? Perhaps because of his usual bad taste, or perhaps because he had been single for too long in his previous life, Li Qingming really couldn't bear to see the male and female protagonists get together smoothly so early. Under his arrangement, although one demon and one person love each other, there is always a gap that cannot be overcome. One is a poor scholar whose family is impoverished, and the other is a fox demon whose life is firmly controlled by the old demon from Montenegro. Even if they are in love, how can they overcome all kinds of obstacles? Afraid that she would bring trouble to Ning Kaichen, Ni Xiaochen hesitated a lot and made a difficult decision. From being as gentle as water in the morning, she became a city woman who was disliked by everyone. There is no more food to cook and no more clothes to wash. Ning Kaichen didn't care about this, but he was hampered by all kinds of ridicule and looked down upon him. After a big quarrel, the two finally separated angrily. But just after she left Ning Kaichen, Ni Xiaochen was tortured by her grandma into a state of disgrace. Not only was she stripped of her magic power, but she was also forced to use her mortal body to chop down all the dead trees in the mountains into firewood, otherwise she would go to kill the elm scholar. Under the swaying wind and snow, Ni Xiaochen's hands were dripping with blood, dripping into plums on the snow. In the end, he became a white fox lying in the ice and snow, with blood coming from the corners of his mouth and almost losing his soul. This development made everyone in the audience, whether they were watching this play for the first time or not, couldn't help but curse. They were not cursing the actors on the stage, but were kindly greeting the people who arranged the play. The stage special effects created using various array equipment made them feel as if they were seeing the infatuated fox demon Ni Xiaochen under the heavy snow. The play is good to watch and the singing is good, but the person behind the scenes who wrote the script and rehearsed the play is not a son of man. Does any fellow Taoist know who arranged this play? Let's go quickly tonight to express our regards. But the more they scolded him, the more obvious the hidden smile on Li Qingming's lips became. This is called handing out some candies, and then giving some knives. When readers chase and shout that they want to send some specialties to the author, the dog author behind the screen is always laughing and joking. Why is it always easy to attach the word, art, to the ending of a tragedy? It is simply that it is more likely to arouse emotional resonance and leave a deep impression on people. The more bumpy the journey, the scenery at the end will be more pleasant. All the bitterness you experienced before is the flavoring for the sweetness later. Li Qingming has read a lot of books and written a lot, and he is very familiar with this drama. To be honest, if these links were missing, this drama would be much less impressive and would not attract such a big response. Just like Li Qingming listened to so many classic plays in the orphanage, most of them made people cry. This scene, in the eyes of the little guy, made her feel the same. Dad, this Montenegro grandma is really bad. She cried and pouted, as if she had thought of some extremely tragic scene. Li Qingming was also busy comforting her. He didn't want to see the little girl shed a tear, but he particularly enjoyed the process of comforting her. Good monsters will be rewarded with good things, and bad monsters will be rewarded with bad things. This is also another purpose of Li Qingming's trip. In addition to letting the little guy relieve his knot, he also wants to create such a sense for everyone. He didn't want to see the little guy wearing a sun hat half the size of her body and a long skirt that was too bulky and not close-fitting to cover up certain defects on his body when he saw her again. One day, he must eliminate the so-called difference between men and monsters. Let's start from Linan City. The drama that follows is interesting to watch. The scholar Ning Kaichen realizes it later, and together with the swordsman Yan Chixia, they help the people of this area to get rid of the old black mountain demon who caused trouble in the mountains and wilderness, and finally have a baby with the fox demon Ni Xiaochen. Pile of little foxes. When the scene came to an end, everyone felt as if they were in a different world. The little guy was also confused. It took him a while to wake up, but his brows never relaxed. If you ask her what the play is about, she can't tell you. She only remembers that the fox demon in it was kicked out of the house after he couldn't wash, cook, and chop firewood. Then my grandma will be kicked out of the house sooner or later. With such worries, Pei Zulu returned to the courtyard and found Pei Zinan, who was lying leisurely on the soft couch in the study, reading a book. Aniang, she shouted loudly. Feeling a little noisy, Pei Zinan was slightly impatient and said, "Say. I'm telling you, get up quickly and go chop wood and wake up." The little guy really mustered up his courage, and without any lag, he said all the words he had been thinking about all the way, and even the missed ones were said smoothly. Oh, Yehu also remembered to wash it. If you are lazy now, what will you do if you are kicked out of your home? Pei Zulu was thinking dully when he saw that Pei Zinan not only didn't respond, he was even lying there reading a book without moving at all. She couldn't help but frown. Why are you so disobedient? So, the little guy imitated the tone and words of the old black mountain demon when he spoke before, and tried his best to make a fierce expression. Pei Zinan, you must not listen to me, right? Believe it or not, I. But this time, before Pei Zulu finished speaking, he was stared at by that cold and faint gaze, making his whole body tremble, and his ears almost hid in his hair. Auntie, I didn't hear you clearly. Please say it again. Pei Zulu, who had been so imposing just now, was now feeling uneasy. For as long as she can remember, she would hear this tone from Pei Zinan every time she made a mistake. The result had never been different, it was just a matter of the length of time to fry the bamboo shoots. But I obviously do it for my mother-in-law's own good. Pei Zulu thought to himself, and inexplicably gained more courage to look at Pei Zinan. She had a little more courage, but she had already used her hands to protect her little butt firmly. This action could bring her a little sense of security. She stuttered and asked, "Really, do you really want to hear me say it again?" Pei Zinan responded calmly and moved his eyes from the page to her daughter. Unexpectedly, the little guy rolled his eyes and was about to fall on her. "I said I really care about Grandma. When I grow up, I will definitely wash and cook for Grandma. Please, don't call Pei Zulu stupid, she sometimes has a very bright mind." Pei Zinan held down the little guy's head with one hand and couldn't help but have a smile on her face. As a witch, she really couldn't figure out why she wanted to die after giving birth to a daughter. She did things that made her angry and laughing every day. Recently I figured out the reason. Like her father. Thinking of this, Pei Zinan's expression became even colder, and even the smile that had just appeared in his eyes disappeared. How can my daughter, Pei Zinan, look like Li Qingming? But that's the fact. Not only is this annoying appearance, but even some of the little habits seem to be carved out of the same mold in recent days. Seeing her hesitating there, Pei Zinan suddenly felt more in danger. In just this short period of time, this little guy has become like this. If some time passes, will the word, Pei, in front of her name be replaced by the word, Li? But what did your father say? Pei Zinan asked. Dad, Pei Zulu blinked, then shook his head, briefly recounted the show he watched today, and did not forget to emphasize, "So, Mom, go quickly, or you will cry when your dad kicks you out one day." Yes, that fox demon named Xiao Chen is so miserable. The little guy's garbled words were so confusing that Pei Zinan couldn't tell what she was talking about. But it doesn't matter, the fault is all Li Qingming's fault. Who told you to take her out to see some show if you have nothing to do? Pei Zinan never acted sloppily. In a few words, he sent away the little guy who was still chattering about washing clothes, and asked him to call her father. Your mother-in-law has something to do with me. When he suddenly heard this, Li Qingming was really surprised. What good could the witch do to her? Probably nothing is wrong. Pei Zulu patted Li Qingming's arm, looking like a proud little rooster, and said in a confident tone, "Little guy, I just taught my father a good lesson. Grandma, she must apologize to Dad now." Hearing what she said, Li Qingming suddenly started sweating. The lesson may have been a real lesson, but it was his turn to be taught the lesson. As for apologizing, it is impossible to apologize in this life. Seeing his little cotton-padded jacket holding her little head up, looking forward to his praise, Li Qingming smiled bitterly and rubbed her little face. "Then Daddy, I have to thank you." "Daddy, you're welcome." The little guy's smart and delicate facial features suddenly bloomed with brilliant colors. He crossed his hands behind his back and twisted his body slightly, obviously very happy. Li Qingming couldn't help but rub her face again. When she turned around and walked towards the study, all her smiles turned slightly bitter. This little cotton-padded jacket is close to the body, but it leaks a little. However, could he, Li Qingming, be afraid of that witch? Even if you were really scared, you should say something. Snapped. In just a few steps, Li Qingming was filled with the confidence of the past. As soon as he entered the room, he straightened his back and asked the witch condescendingly. "What's the matter? Just tell me directly. My time is very valuable." His gesture made Pei Zinan feel impatient again. Where did these two people, big and small, get their aura from today? "Li Qingming, do you really think that I can become your wife?" "I don't know my dignity." Pei Zinan's eyes drooped slightly, and the door closed with a click. Just like in the past, this study has become a prison for her to imprison Li Qingming. No matter what happens inside, it will never be spread to the outside world. But the difference is that today Li Qingming does not pretend to be calm like in the past, but he is really shaken by the storm but does not move. "What tricks do you have?" Pei Zinan was keenly aware of this strangeness, but before he finished speaking, his pupils suddenly shrank and turned into vertical pupils with a long golden light. Immediately afterwards, his black hair instantly turned into snow white, and his pink fox ears and 9 sky-shielding beard exploded, covering the entire soft couch. "Li Qingming, how dare you poison me?" Pei Zinan's face was as cold as ice, but he felt extremely weird. "No, you, a witch, can't think better of me. Would my noble Li Qingming do such a dirty deed?" As soon as Li Qingming finished speaking, he heard a snort with an extremely sarcastic tone. "What you did back then can still be called glorious." Cough. Li Qingming coughed slightly to cover up his embarrassment, and then said, I just found some soul-purifying incense that is extremely rare in your demon tribe a few days ago, and I thought of giving it to you to smell. The so-called soul-purifying incense is actually a treasure that allows the demon clan to enhance their soul, but at the cost of revealing their true form, slowing down their movements, and being unable to mobilize their demonic power. Get out of here. Pei Zinan secretly felt that something was wrong, and was about to draw his sword, but found that Li Qingming came to his side and hugged the center of the 9 tails behind him. It was extremely rare that a look of panic flashed across this witch's face. And Li Qingming's voice sounded faintly in her ears. Witch, kneel down for me. My husband wants to teach you what is dignity and inferiority. Li Qingming, Li Qingming, Li Qingming. 3 low shouts, like the howling of the bone-chilling wind, showed that Pei Zinan had completely lost her composure at this time. She turned her body and stared at a flying figure with cold eyes tightly holding her most magical hair. Every hair was shining with a little fluorescent light. Li Qingming of Foxtail. The jade-like chest rose and fell, the sharp edge in the phoenix eyes was almost real, and the surrounding air also rippled with colorless ripples, shooting towards Li Qingming with a cold air. With a bang, a crystalline coral worth tens of thousands of medium-grade spiritual stones on the Millennium Spiritual Begonia cabinet next to the soft couch turned into a burst of powder, and several valuable treasures also crackled and rolled to the floor. Seeing this made Li Qingming's heart twitch. This prodigal fool. Li Qingming, if you dare to do the following again, you will fall to the ground. Pei Zinan's voice became more and more indifferent. Her thin eyebrows like willow swords and her thick upturned eyelashes were stained with white frost, as if she were a god who had just stepped out of the cold wind in the ice and snow, and even her words were like a solemn god. Edict. But it's your head. Even in this situation, Li Qingming had no intention of letting go. Instead, he took his time and looked at Pei Zinan in this demonized state. Her flaming red lips and picturesque dark eyebrows are extremely gorgeous, and her golden eyes add a unique sense of mystery to her. Beauty is naturally extremely beautiful, but it has 2 completely different tastes from her beauty after taking off the veil. It is also a cold beauty, but it has a more sacred and inviolable temperament. Which man can refuse white hair? He can't do it anyway. Seeing that Li Qingming did not show any timidity, but instead invaded him wantonly with his eyes, the murderous intention in Pei Zinan's heart was completely overflowing, entangled in the flying white hair, ready to go. A flash of chi flew past, cutting off a strand of radiation in front of Li Qingming's forehead. At the same time, there was a shallow blood mark on his left cheek. Li Qingming, you really think I can't do it? Pei Zinan's tone was so cold that even the question became a plain statement, if you don't. Li Qingming interrupted directly, holding Foxtail's arms harder and harder. I don't want to, what can you do to me? If threats are effective, then whoever has the toughest mouth will be invincible. It's you. Li Qingming paused and said with a smile, if you beg for mercy now, I will save you some face. How could he not see that this enchantress was at the end of her strength? Don't underestimate the incense he had just secretly lit. Just a small piece of flower spirit stone was enough for the nascent soul monks to fight to the death. Expensive things have no shortcomings except that they are expensive, and the effect is really remarkable. Otherwise, according to Pei Zinan's temperament, even if he didn't lose his head, he would already be cursing down there. It's a pity that today this place is called Li Qingming Square. Li Qingming. Pei Zinan's eyes were like fire, but then his body suddenly trembled, and Sha Fei's cheeks couldn't help but let out a low sigh. Just because Li Qingming had already started stroking the fox tail down, his technique was so skillful that he was like a cat slave who had been practicing for many years and had learned from Empress Shiji. But how can Pei Zinan be a cat that can be petted? Anyone who comes will eat a few claws. Let you know what it feels like to have the skin and flesh ripped apart. What's more, she has such a temper that she wants to trample the entire spiritual world under her feet. Who dares? Li Qingming smiled innocently. Hey, I dare. Li Qing. Pei Zinan's blood-red lips parted, and there was another squeak. Call me husband, Li Qingming said slowly, feeling that the plush tail in his hand was really addictive. Li Qingming, I must. Ying, you really don't know how to be humble. Can you call me by my husband's name? Li, you yell again. To kill you, I must. You want it. You said I'll give it to you if you want it. Wake up, Pei Zinan. Looking at Pei Zinan, who was blushing and slumped on the soft couch, Li Qingming felt refreshed. You fool, do you really think I am easy to bully? Thinking like this, he ruffled the foxtail again, feeling that he should be nicer to the little guy. If she hadn't told him this secret, he really wouldn't have been able to completely regain his position. What a sweet little cotton padded jacket from Daddy. His eyes fell on Pei Zinan, who looked slightly embarrassed. Li Qingming lowered his head slightly. Do you now know who is the master of this family? Pei Zinan seemed to be an ice sculpture with an expressionless face, without any response. Li Qingming didn't care and continued to rub the fox tail. Do you know who is superior between you and me? Pei Zinan still maintained the same face, but he was biting his red lips to prevent himself from making a sound. Speak, Pei Zinan, why don't you speak? Li Qingming did not hide his teasing feelings, and suddenly understood why this enchantress loved to treat him like this before. The feeling was indeed difficult to describe with a single word, pleasant. Aren't you a witch who said that I will be under you for the rest of my life? Why can't you say anything now? Tisk, I should bring you a mirror now and show you what you look like. After venting all the grievances he felt during this period, Li Qingming paused his hands and waited quietly for Pei Zinan's response. Li Qingming, you are shameless. Nonsense. Li Qingming raised his eyebrows. Look at how neat my big white teeth are. Li Qingming, how can you afford to be called the righteous young swordsman by outsiders? What kind of righteous sword immortal? Li Qingming didn't care. The past was the past, and the present is the present. What does that young swordsman from the past have to do with Li Qingming, who is now a mediocre person in my cultivation? You, Pei Zinan finally couldn't speak, and scolded coldly, you are really despicable. But little did she know that her verbal abuse was no longer as smooth as before, but instead had a bit of a woman's unique squeamishness. It sounds like coquettishness. I hope you will realize later whether these two words refer to you or me. Li Qingming loosened his arms, changed his posture and continued to rub the foxtail. Don't even think about it. Li Qingming, I must kill him. Ying, Pei Zinan's breathing stagnated. Beg me. Don't even think about it. Beg me. Stop. Li Qingming, I beg you. What did you call me? Li Qingming, please give me just enough, just enough. Mr. Shanggong. Pei Zinan's voice was like a mosquito. Li Qingming stopped robbing the foxtail and said with a victor's attitude, I didn't hear you clearly, please shout again. Pei Zinan pursed her red lips, and it took a long time to say, Mr., from between her teeth for a second time. One word fell to the ground. The inside should be combined with the outside, Shi Jiang. I was conquered by you and cut off all escape routes. I'll be conquered by you like this and drink the poison you've hidden. I am conquered by you like this. Am I conquered by you like this? Ah. Li Qingming couldn't stop teaching Pei Zinan how to sing conquer, mouth to mouth. As the little guy said, as a father, she naturally had to teach her disobedient mother a lot more. However, the soul-purifying incense was limited. After it burned out, Pei Zinan, whose face had not completely faded away from the blush, already placed the sword on Li Qingming's neck with murderous intent. Li Qingming, it's too late for you to regret it now. Oh, Li Qingming didn't even bother to raise his eyelids. He didn't like anyone as soon as the word, big, was written on his face. What Pei Zinan hates the most is that he looks like he is sure of her. Who in the world dares to look down on her like this, Pei Zinan? However, she really didn't want to take action. It wasn't that she couldn't bear it, she was just worried that no one would be able to take care of the little guy after a while. At least, that's what Pei Zinan thinks. If there is a next time, this will be your fate. The sword fell with the sound, and the rare wooden cabinet was split into two halves. Whatever treasures were inside were shattered into flying smoke, leaving no trace at all. Seeing that Li Qingming didn't respond, Pei Zinan spoke coldly, and with a few flickers of his sword, he cut Li Qingming's robe into messy pieces, as if to vent the humiliation he had just suffered. Remember, you, Li Qingming, are nothing more than a plaything, a cauldron, in my hands, Pei Zinan. Ah, yes, yes. Li Qingming doesn't have a dick, and he doesn't have a thick head. If a woman wants to step down, then give it to her. A despicable person who has no sense of shame or respect. Pei Zinan could hardly have noticed the perfunctory nature, and stepped on Li Qingming again intolerable. It seemed like it was forceful, but it was neither painful nor itchy when it fell on Li Qingming. Hey, you can't kill me if you step on me. Li Qingming took a deep breath of air and complained loudly. It would be better to die. Pei Zinan looked indifferently, but he never noticed that there was a hidden smile on the corner of his mouth. Pei Zinan, did not lose. However, after teaching Li Qingming a lesson, it was Pei Zulu's turn. Without even thinking about it, Pei Zinan knew that it must be that little Pei Zulu who told Li Qingming this secret. If you have a father, you will forget about your mother. In a flash, Pei Zinan landed in front of the big sand pit in the courtyard. No child can resist the temptation to play in the mud, not even adults. Li Qingming, who is responsive to the little guy's requests, naturally has a plan like this. Not only is the sand in it the kind that can nourish the body of monks. He also spent a lot of money to refine a set of shovels, excavators, road rollers and other toys. I just saw that Li Qingming and Pei Zinan had something to talk about, so the little guy sat in the sandpit alone and had a great time. Although sometimes she couldn't turn her head when talking, her hands-on ability was extremely strong. She actually built a courtyard and houses one after another, which were lifelike and exquisite. When he looked up and saw Pei Zinan, Pei Zulu clapped his little hands and hurriedly got up. His tone was extremely proud. Onyang, look at how well built my house is. Pei Zinan didn't respond or nod, until he heard the little guy introduce it in a very disgusting way. Auntie, let me tell you, this is the biggest room, I built it just for you. From now on, Daddy and I will live in there. The bed will be big too. Looking in the direction pointed by the little guy's finger, Pei Zinan suddenly felt a sourness in her heart that she couldn't distinguish. The house Pei Zulu pointed to was indeed the largest and most exquisite one. Only, why are there so many houses in this courtyard? What about the others? Pei Zinan asked quietly. Others? The little guy turned around and laughed without thinking. Of course it's for the others. But these words stopped as abruptly as her laughter. Of course, Pei Zulu glanced at his mother-in-law. Of course. She's really not good at lying. This kind of performance was enough for Pei Zinan to know her answer, and his eyes became more solemn. This ability of one big and one small is really better than the other. Is it for your other ladies? Pei Zinan asked lightly. Yeah, the little guy nodded subconsciously. He thought to himself that grandma really understands him, but his face suddenly changed after a moment, and his ears had already twitched down. It's over, my butt is going to be beaten again. With this thought in his mind, Pei Zulu almost cried. He timidly raised his head and looked at Pei Zinan. Auntie, I didn't hear what you asked clearly. Can you ask me again? Ha! The only answer she received was a faint sneer. Pei Zulu wiped the non-existent cold sweat from his forehead, and began to lower his head and count the sand on the ground. After a few seconds of silence, suddenly wind came under his feet and stirred up a burst of dust. In just a blink of an eye, she rushed into the bedroom, closed the door, patted her chest, and gasped for air. It's okay, I almost started to bloom again. But when she turned her head, she met Pei Zinan's faint eyes. Pei Zulu was so frightened that he actually jumped up on the spot and hid in the quilt, wrapping himself tightly. She has nowhere to run. Is this called despair? The little one suddenly understood the word that her father taught her last time, and then she remembered what Li Qingming had told her, to have the courage to resist all injustices. Right, I have to listen to my father. Be a brave little pig dear. Pei Zulu thought for a while, his eyes gradually became firmer, and he mustered up the courage to shout to Pei Zinan outside the quilt. Auntie, this is wrong for you, do you know? What's wrong? Pei Zinan was not in a hurry and asked along with her. You can't just beat and scold. Education. You can't be like this when you are a parent. Otherwise it will be a gang, domestic violence. Racking his brains to recall what Li Qingming taught, Pei Zulu became more and more fluent as he spoke. You will be arrested and taken away quickly. Auntie, let me tell you, the little guy felt that what he said was very reasonable, and the little guy became a little bolder. Do you know what will happen if I report it to the official? How about it? How is it? The little guy's tone suddenly became louder. Dad said he would put you in jail. Do you know what will happen in jail? But you will have to sleep with mice. We'll sleep with rats. Aren't you afraid, Auntie? Pei Zulu was very afraid of mice, but he secretly felt bad because of Pei Zinan's calmness. Do you know how scary mice are? Have no idea. Then if you ask me, I'll tell you, before the little guy gave up, Dad said, "She is a smart and clever little guy." Quote. Pei Zinan was stunned and let out a breath. Feeling that he would not be able to survive today without a heavy blow, he asked, "Are you more afraid of mice or me?" The room suddenly fell into silence. After a while, the little guy's voice sounded again from the quilt. It was not a word of discussion, nor was it a plea for mercy, but a loud cry. Wow! Small theater. The year has come, and the firecrackers are noisy outside the house. Inside the house, the little pig deer wearing a big red cotton-padded jacket was lying in the arms of his father, Li Qingming, with a lifeless expression on his face. "Dad, my butt hurts. I need to eat some candy to get better. Can you help me? I want that candy back." "Bow, there's nothing I can do about it. Your mother-in-law is very angry." Li Qingming spread his hands and said, "Let's say New Year greetings to the brothers and uncles present, and they might give you a red envelope." "Red envelope? Is it some delicious candy?" "It's not sugar, but I can buy you a lot of sugar." Ah! When the little guy heard this, his eyes lit up again. He bowed deeply in front of the screen, his little head almost hanging to his knees, and the fingers of his hands were intertwined so nervously that they were almost knotted. Many parents are always accustomed to venting the anger and grievances they suffer outside into their own homes. The so-called family is a warm harbor, but sometimes it is like a garbage dump where many negative emotions are dumped. Although Pei Zinan is indifferent by nature, she is by no means such an egotistical parent. To a certain extent, the little one's existence is more important than her life. Sometimes, she just couldn't bear it anymore. "The more I think about it, the angrier I get, and the angrier I get, the more I think about it, and then the more I think about it, the angrier I get. Especially when Li Qingming comes here, this little guy who is always out of the ordinary seems to have found a backer that can make her domineering. She can always ignite a fire for herself accurately, and then add some oil and vinegar. Come on and fan yourself with a fan to make the fire more prosperous." Pei Zinan didn't know if he was too gentle every time, so that Pei Zulu's memory did not improve at all, but his acting skills of pretending to cry became more and more sophisticated. Just like now, she stopped her hands early, and her palms were suspended in the air for half a cup of tea, while the little man lying on her knees was still crying, and his body was still shaking with its natural frequency, legs raised and lowered. It was like the pain of a slap on her buttocks, causing her body to move like this. Pei Zinan secretly took a deep breath, then took his palm back, suppressed the thought of letting her remember it for a long time, and said coldly, "That's enough." The crying in the room stopped for a moment, and then whined at a more rapid frequency. Pei Zinan's head hurt when he heard it, and even his soul ached. If she hadn't watched her belly grow bigger and bigger during the pregnancy, and then watched the little one crawl out of it, Pei Zinan would never have thought that this could be her daughter. "If you shed one more tear, you will never be able to stay with your father again." With just one sentence, the little guy stopped all his crying, and even used his little hands to rub his cheeks toward the corners of his eyes, as if he was trying to stuff back his tears drop by drop. She didn't want to leave her father. Just when Li Qingming left her sight, Pei Zulu thought about it for a long time. "But how can you hold back your tears?" Pei Zulu tried it a few times and suddenly became extremely panicked. The more he thought about it, the more panicked he became, and the more panicked he became, the more tears fell down his face. In just a few breaths, she shed as many tears as she had shed just now. When Pei Zinan saw this, he felt sad at the same time, and grew impatient at the same time. He asked her to go to some sect to cause trouble and kill people. It's really difficult. In a flash, Pei Zinan was already holding Pei Zulu, who was crying non-stop, and threw his hand directly into Li Qingming's arms. "Come and comfort him." Pei Zinan's attitude is very much like those parents who were born in 1995 and 2000. Their children are just a part of their play. Li Qingming was full of teasing, but had no time to pay attention to Pei Zinan. He held the inner side of the little guy's arm with both hands and lifted it up. "Who made my little dear feel so sad?" Finding that he was back in his father's arms, Pei Zulu's mood became much more stable, but he still couldn't hold back his tears. He fell into Li Qingming's arms again, crying and asking, "Dad, I don't want to leave you." "No, I don't want it." Li Qingming glanced sideways at Pei Zinan, and immediately knew the general reason, and said with relief, "How could it be possible?" Didn't Daddy promise that he will always like you and be with you for the rest of his life? He even hooked up. Yes, that's it, we even pulled the hook. Pei Zulu nodded, and furtively glanced at Pei Zinan, then immediately looked away. She hugged Li Qingming's neck tightly and said emphatically, and it's 1,000 years, 10,000 years. There is a hint of showing off in it. It must have been what Anyang said to scare you again, right? Li Qingming was really not afraid of Pei Zinan, a witch, and pointed it out directly. She has a bad personality. The words, bad character, made Pei Zinan's eyebrows slightly raised. Bad character. The little guy's eyes were wide open and still filled with tears. She probably understood the meaning of this word, and it was precisely because she understood that she hesitated. The admiration in my heart rose even more spontaneously. He is truly worthy of being my father. After thinking about it for a moment, Pei Zulu gradually gained more confidence. She imitated Li Qingming's tone and had the courage to speak to Pei Zinan. Auntie, you have a bad character. As soon as he finished speaking, Pei Zinan's eyebrows on the other side were uncontrollably raised slightly, and his eyes were quiet. But seeing that her father was here, her mother-in-law didn't dare to say anything back. The little guy's back was really stiff. Thinking that he was not powerful enough, he stood up from Li Qingming's arms. Is Daddy here? Am I still afraid of Grandma? Pei Zulu stood with his feet on Li Qingming's thighs, put one hand on his hips and pointed at Pei Zinan with the other. His voice, which had not yet completely removed the smell of milk, sounded very arrogant. Auntie, you have a bad character. No, my baby, I just want to coax you. Just say it once and act coquettishly. I didn't let you score twice, so you're going to get yourself beaten like this. Not to mention that Li Qingming was unexpected, Pei Zinan was even more angry and stunned, and almost couldn't control the urge to draw his sword, wanting to chop something. Only the little guy was so happy in his heart, thinking that if her mother-in-law still wanted to beat her next time, she would yell out these words to scare her. Seeing that he was about to have another meal of fried bamboo shoots, Li Qingming hurriedly coughed a few times to draw attention to himself. Then he took out a box-like toy from the storage ring. The style was very similar to the claw machine in the mall in his previous life. It was all red and pink. Through the transparent cover above, you could still see the small balls inside. He placed it on the table. It's like an exquisite hut. It immediately attracted the little guy's attention. Daddy, Daddy, what is this? The new toy I made for you is called the wish machine. Li Qingming put it aside on the shelf that was originally used to place potted plants. He snapped his fingers and the wish machine became large enough for Pei Zulu to stand on it. Control size. Inside the balls, Dad put some toy candies and some notes. Note, it's just a note that can be used to designate Dad or Mom to do things. There are also blank pages for you to write by yourself, Li Qingming explained patiently. He would not let go of a toy that can promote parent-child relationship. After listening to his explanation, the little guy's eyes lit up and he thought it was really interesting. First, Baji kissed Li Qingming, and she did not forget to turn around and greet Pei Zinan. Anyang, come and play together. Pei Zulu realized that her mother-in-law was listening carefully just now. It could be seen that Li Qingming was also looking at him. Pei Zinan felt that he had been caught inexplicably, and said expressionlessly, "Do you really think that I am as childish as you?" His tone was cold, but his feet moved only a little bit. You can't always trust a woman's mouth, because duplicity is the most realistic portrayal of them. You can't trust a man's words either, they are a liar. Sensing that Pei Zinan was somewhat interested, but unable to hide his face, Li Qingming deliberately said, "When my mother grows up, she will not be interested in toys like this, and she will not even touch them. Want to play? I wonder if you, a seductress, are thick-skinned. I can't get enough of you." Ow, the little guy nodded. He was already lying on the machine control table, with his whole face pressed against the glass cover. He was looking at the crystal balls inside, thinking about all the things hidden inside. What baby are you wearing? Insert the coin first, then use this joystick to control the paw, aim it, and press the button and the paw will fall. Li Qingming bent down and demonstrated to the little guy first, if you catch it, the wish ball will fall. It will come out from under it. Pei Zulu looked at it extremely seriously, without even blinking, for fear of missing a step. When Li Qingming handed him a box of metal coins with a small fox pattern on them, she looked at them curiously several times before carefully inserting the coins. His little hands gripped the joystick tightly, his eyes fixed on the paws that moved as the joystick shook. Move, aim, press the button and fire. After a crisp sound that seemed to be about a major event in life, the little guy couldn't help but clasp his hands together, and the fox tail behind him swayed nervously. Ouch! But the first attempt did not bring her any good results. Seeing that her claws failed, her fox ears and tail also pulled down. Dad. It's okay, come again. Li Qingming rubbed her head to encourage her. The game was a game, but it did not prevent him from using it to instill some ideas into the little one. If it doesn't work once, try it again. Keep persisting, and you will always be able to do it. Success. With Li Qingming's encouragement, Pei Zulu didn't have any worries. Dad is right. There are so many colorful wish balls inside, there is always one that can be caught. After trying a few more operations, the mechanical claw finally grabbed a blue wish ball, making it jump for joy on the spot, and its two little hands turned red. With a thud, she picked up the fallen blue wish ball with her own hands, held it in the palm of her hand and handed it to Li Qingming. Dad. Li Qingming was stunned. You caught him, you don't need to give it to Dad. No, Pei Zulu's tone was more decisive than anything else. The ball you catch for the first time must be given to Dad. Intimate. It's really my considerate little cotton-padded jacket. While Li Qingming was moved, Pei Zinan's expression turned even colder. To be more precise, it tastes delicious. She obviously gave birth to it several months into her pregnancy. She obviously fed it with juice day by day. She obviously took her last name Pei. But why is it that once I have a shit daddy, my mother-in-law completely disappears from my heart? Leng Budding noticed a burst of coldness. Li Qingming was slightly stunned, and then he was in a good mood. He took the wish ball and deliberately shook it towards Pei Zinan, showing off his intentions openly and honestly. It seems to be saying, I'm sorry, you stinky witch, but our daughter just likes me more. Hard. Pei Zinan's fists suddenly became hard and they were clenched together without realizing it. However, Li Qingming didn't give her a chance to get angry. He turned around and knelt down to play with his daughter. Can Dad open it for you? Okay, okay, Pei Zulu said again. Dad, wait. Li Qingming didn't know what she meant. When he saw her covering her eyes with her hands, she was so cute again. After it was completely covered, the little guy asked Li Qingming to open it. Okay, Dad can open it. Alright. Li Qingming smiled and twisted away the wish ball, and made an extremely childish sound of thump thump thump. The little guy put down his hand, and after seeing what was in the ball clearly, he couldn't help but scream in surprise. It's so childish. Pei Zinan, who was standing by, saw this in her eyes, and the sourness in her heart surged up again, but she actually found that it was mixed with a little bit of sweetness. Daddy, this is marriage candy. Asked about the smell, the little guy identified the small balls inside, which were the marriage candies from before. She couldn't wait to pick it up and fed one into Li Qingming's mouth first. Dad, eat. Then he ran up to Pei Zinan and raised his hands high. Mom, eat. Pei Zinan didn't like this kind of close contact and refused with a frown. How could the little guy agree? Auntie, this is a marriage candy. It's so delicious. If you eat it, you can renew your marriage in the next life. Pei Zinan, who didn't believe in the gods and Buddhas in the sky, but only believed in the sharp sword in his own hand, still shook his head. Then he hesitated because the little guy suddenly said something in a low tone. Aunt, do you not want to be the little guy's mom in the next life? Then, I'll try what it tastes like. Pei Zinan took it and put it in his mouth. Auntie, is it sweet? Is it delicious? Facing the little guy's question, which seemed to be offering a treasure, Pei Zinan still looked indifferent and said, it's just normal. Just these two words, nothing else. But the sweetness on the tip of the tongue has already spread quickly in the mouth, and then flows into the heart with the blood. A little bitter, but very sweet. Okay. The little guy who didn't know that Pei Zinan was just arrogant was a little disappointed. He turned around and continued to stand in front of the machine, and happily grabbed the wish ball. She will grab some other delicious food to open her eyes. Daddy, I caught you again. When she caught it again, she cheered happily again. After opening it, the excitement became even stronger. In the wish ball, there was actually a piece of paper with a little fox printed on it. Daddy, Daddy, is this a wish paper? The little guy circled around Li Qingming several times, but he couldn't suppress the joy in his heart. This is simply her happiest day. Wrong. Every day with Dad is the happiest day. That's it, Li Qingming responded with a smile. Then what do you want Dad to do? I want. Pei Zulu held the blank wish note tightly in his little hands, and his little head was spinning, trying to think of what he wanted his father to do with him. But after thinking about it, she couldn't think of anything, because no matter what she wanted to do, Li Qingming would always agree. Isn't this just a waste? No. The little guy's brows were almost twisted into knots. He suddenly stared at Pei Zinan on the side and said loudly, I want my mother-in-law. Dear Dad, 100 blows, 1,000 blows, 10,000 blows. Grandma, marriage candy isn't sweet, but Daddy's mouth is. Chapter 51. Pei Zulu didn't believe what Pei Zinan said. The marriage candy is so good and sweet, and it was given by her father, so it will be even sweeter, okay. You are all adults, and you still lie to people every day. Shameless. Pei Zulu's clever little brain can always play a vital role in critical moments and come up with the most suitable ideas. The princess in the story always said that the prince's mouth was very sweet. Dad just ate the marriage candy, so now it must be extremely sweet. I see other people's parents hugging each other and kissing each other, but my mother has a cold face every day and will be kicked out of the house sooner or later. I still have to help her. I haven't even found a new lady to drink Nana. The more the little guy thinks about it, the more he feels that he is really smart and considerate. Her mother-in-law was so lucky to have given birth to herself. She had accumulated so much money in her previous life. Pei Zulu kept wagging his tail, not forgetting to raise his slightly rounded chin, and blinked at Pei Zinan several times. I've given you the flight fee, you have to take advantage of it. But Pei Zinan had no idea of accepting this kindness, and felt in his heart that he had acted lightly after all. Let her kiss Li Qingming. Did he think that the sword in Pei Zinan's hand was blunt, or did he really think that she was Li Qingming's wife? Li Qingming was also sweating secretly, asking this stinky witch to come over and kiss him. This scene was too beautiful and exciting, but he couldn't imagine that his blood would splash several meters away. After much hesitation, Li Qingming felt that it was better to temporarily ease the relationship between the two. It was obviously not cost-effective for him to scratch here and there every day, and then he would actually be bitten with blood. My dear, your suggestion is very good, and my father also likes it very much. Just don't suggest it again next time. He smiled helplessly in his heart. Li Qingming had already leaned down to divert the little guy's attention. Before the words came to his mouth, there was a moist feeling on his face, and there was a chirp in his ear. Auntie, if you don't know how to kiss, I'll teach you. Pei Zulu released his hands holding Li Qingming's cheeks, then turned to look up at Pei Zinan, who had always been silent. Have you given up on your studies? The latter was still as cold as ice and snow, but there was only a hint of howling wind. Mom is so stupid, the little guy muttered in a low voice, chirped again, and asked again, isn't it useless now? Pei Zinan still didn't say a word, and her mood at this time was extremely weird that no one could know. The warmth revealed by the little guy's every move made her feel soft in her heart, and she was a little greedy for the atmosphere at this time. At the same time, there is incomparable resistance coming from the soul, like the dusty white smoke raised by burning firewood. It is too dense and covers the warmth of the swaying firelight underneath. The uneasiness, like a maggot attached to the bone, had already trapped her in that airtight cocoon, leaving her speechless. The little guy waited for a long time, but without waiting for her response, his tail drooped to the ground again. My grandma doesn't seem to like my father very much. This thought suddenly appeared and took root in her mind, and she couldn't get rid of it. It was accompanied by bursts of sadness that rose and fell. Even the wish machine, which I liked so much a second ago, suddenly lost much interest. Li Qingming also noticed this change and was also troubled. Raising a baby was not as easy as he expected. No matter how many rehearsals and plans he had, he still couldn't grasp the ever-changing childish heart. You haven't caught the other surprises that Dad has prepared inside. Today is the first day. Dad will give you 5 more coins to catch. Li Qingming thought for a while and took out some more fox coins. In order to maintain a sense of freshness and mobilize the enthusiasm of the little guy, Li Qingming originally only planned to give the little guy 3 game coins every day, but if he could complete his homework on time every day, he would be rewarded with corresponding game coins. Just after a while, the currency has already bottomed out. The most effective way to comfort a child is to do something that makes her curious or like it and divert her emotions. Thank you, Dad. Pei Zulu smiled a little and became happier, but he still couldn't get rid of the disappointment in his heart. When Li Qingming saw it, he couldn't help but secretly turned his head and glared at Pei Zinan. His big hand in his robe pressed a small remote control, causing the wish ball in the wish machine to tumble, and then a colorful wish ball appeared at the top. The dazzling colors made the little guy cry out, throwing away all his previous worries. Daddy, Daddy, I want to catch this. Under Li Qingming's control, just when he had used up a few coins, the crystal ball also reached Pei Zulu's hands. Wow, it's a little fox pendant. The little guy picked up the little fox statue carved from the finest Qianyuan chalcedony, looked around, and suddenly let out an even more enthusiastic exclamation. Dad, this can't be me, right? Looking at that lively face, Pei Zulu was so happy. This was obviously her little one. Of course it's you. Li Qingming nodded. If his daughter is happy, the father will naturally be happy too. Anyang, do you think this pendant looks good? Pei Zulu jumped up to Pei Zinan without any grudges, holding up the pendant that was 90% similar to his own. Anyang, it looks good. Do you like it too? Pei Zinan, who had been standing there alone for a long time, finally made a sound. She glanced at the lifelike pendant and knew whether to say that Li Qingming was willful or that he truly doted on his daughter. If outsiders knew about such a precious Qianyuan chalcedony, it was made into a toy to please children, and I was afraid that they would be scolded and a waste of natural resources. Auntie, does it look good? Does it look good? Pei Zulu came closer again, his eyes flickering. So cute. Pei Zinan just said simply without any fluctuation in tone, I don't like it, just average. Generally, dislike. Li Qingming's heart skipped a beat when he heard it. It would be fine if it was anything else, but this pendant is completely another little guy. All your answers are also responses to the little guy. No. When Pei Zulu heard this, his ears were pressed against his hair, as if he had 2 patches on it. It turns out, it's me that grandma doesn't like. Holding the pendant in his hand, the little guy didn't move at all, only lowering his head. Then there were little traces of drops on the ground, and in the blink of an eye there was a large area of wetness that spread out, as if it had rained. I just missed squatting in the corner, drawing circles and crying. Li Qingming's chest was really tight. He winked at Pei Zinan crazily and immediately comforted him. Your mother-in-law didn't mean that. She's just thin-skinned and can't speak out. The little guy with his head lowered spoke in a heart-stopping cry, but Daddy, if you don't like me, you don't like me. My mother-in-law obviously doesn't like Daddy, and she doesn't like me either. The crying became louder. In this situation, Li Qingming was also in trouble. The key to solving the problem did not lie with the little guy, nor with him. He could only look at Pei Zinan for help. Caught between the mother and daughter, Li Qingming had no choice but to let the little guy cry intermittently. A long while. Maybe he was tired of hearing it, so Pei Zinan suddenly said, I didn't say I didn't like it. Suddenly, the little guy's crying stopped for a moment, and then he cried hesitantly, well, what about Daddy? Pei Zinan frowned and closed his lips, but did not respond. After a while, he said coldly, what do you want from me so that you don't cry? Kiss Daddy, taste whether his mouth is sweet or not. The atmosphere froze again for a moment, and the tearful little guy had raised his head and stared directly at Pei Zinan. Back and forth, it's back to the same situation as at the beginning. There was another long silence. Seeing Pei Zulu start to shed tears again, Pei Zinan said impatiently, only once. The next moment, her figure was illusory, flickering on the spot, and there was a faint red mark on Li Qingming's face, which seemed to be the sparkling sunset reflected on the lakeside where the fishing boats were singing at night. The little guy sniffed and shrugged, no, it has to be mouth to mouth. Pei Zinan pretended not to hear, but was annoyed by her cry that turned into a howl, and pinched Li Qingming's chin. Right, go up, touch it and leave. Then he lowered his head and stared coldly at the little guy who finally stopped crying. Taste it. Her tone was calm, as if she was telling an ordinary thing, but the blush on her face and cheeks was even brighter than the sunset reflected on the lake, and there was a subtle autumn wave in her eyes, which was the result of the evening breeze blowing through the blooming red flowers. The abundance of peach branches. But there's no sweetness at all. If we were to say we were shocked, Li Qingming was definitely the first among the 3 members of the family. In fact, he didn't have any expectations for Pei Zinan to bow his head and submit. Some people's personalities are destined to be unable to express all the ups and downs like other living beings. Li Qingming always knew from the beginning to the end that Pei Zinan was a good aunt, but she was not a good aunt. It was precisely because of this that he didn't come back to his senses until now. This fool forced her to kiss me. Fortunately, the little guy finally calmed down. She looked at the red lip mark on Li Qingming's cheek, and then at Pei Zinan's cheek, which was even more conspicuous than the red lip mark. All the tears she shed just now were all on her face. A half-crying, half-laughing expression. HMPH, Grandma is lying again. Pei Zinan glanced coldly and disappeared immediately. Daddy, Pei Zulu, who was in a good mood, couldn't wait to cling to Li Qingming again. Please help me put this on my wrist. She wanted to put this pendant on her wrist just now, but she was too busy crying. It's so beautiful. While shaking her little wrist, Pei Zulu couldn't get enough of it, but after a while, she took off the bracelet herself and placed it in Li Qingming's palm. After thinking about it, she held both ends of the bracelet with her 2 small hands and tried to put it on for Li Qingming, but found that her father's wrist was several times as big as hers, so the little guy had to ask the latter for help. "Ah, Dad, the rope is not long enough." Li Qingming used his fingers to hook the tips of her fox ears and said, "They are for you to wear. They are just right long. But, can you change it to a longer one? Don't you like it very much? Or should I change it to a longer chain for you to wear around your neck?" Li Qingming didn't know what she meant, so he could only guess on his own. "I like it," the little guy nodded, "but I don't want to wear it on my wrist, nor do I want to wear it on my neck. I just want to." Li Qingming quietly waited for his daughter's next step. "I think Dad is bringing it." The expression on Pei Zulu's little face was very serious. Why? Li Qingming thought he could guess the answer, but he just wanted to hear the answer from the little guy. Because. The little guy held the pendant with his fingers and placed it on the side of his cheek at the same level as his ear. As long as Dad carries it with him, it feels like he has been with Dad all the time. I want to stay with my dad forever. Even if it is a lie, what you hear from a child will be much more sincere than an adult. For Li Qingming, the little guy's words were like the sound of nature, and these words expressing her love were like sharp arrows, shooting straight into his heart. Phew, oops, I got an arrow in the heart. Hee, it's the cute arrow of love fired by my precious daughter. It doesn't hurt at all. But little one, you have always been by Dad's side, even without him it would still be the same. Li Qingming smiled with extremely gentle eyes. Pei Zulu didn't quite understand. He scratched his ears with his little hands, blinked his big eyes and asked, "Are you a kangaroo, Daddy? Can you put me in your pocket?" "I can't fit you in my pocket." Li Qingming patted the left side of his chest, "but I can hear." The little guy tilted his head and thought for a long time. Suddenly his whole face lit up, he giggled, and his hands twisted and swirled behind his back. She was so smart, how could she not understand that her father was saying that he had her in his heart? That's what her father thinks. Pei Zulu felt that he was so happy that he almost fainted. He just stood there looking silly and happy. Then I also want to put my father at ease. Hey, hee. Wearing the bracelet that Li Qingming put on for her, the little one went to the yard again. Grandpa Fu, Grandpa Fu. Pei Zulu shouted, and Uncle Fu, who was sitting under the tree weaving a bamboo cage, clapped his hands hurriedly. Before he could speak, the little guy raised his wrist and shook it as if to show off. "Grandpa Fu, how do you know Dad? He made me a small pendant, and I knew it looked exactly like me." Even though Uncle Fu was used to the ups and downs of the world, he was stunned for several seconds, and then he smiled heartily and said, "It's beautiful, it's really beautiful." The little guy responded with a smile, and ran to squat down by the flowers on the side to amuse himself. "Fafa, how did you know that Daddy made a beautiful little pendant for me?" "Hey, Foodie, you also know, I obviously never told you." "Oh, even you ants know this." Do you think it's good? He, it's just so. The babble is full of childishness, but I don't know that in the past, the little guy got through those days and nights alone like this. Pei Zulu announced all the way out, but she was still thinking about the two big stone lions at the door. These were her good friends. Looking at the somewhat high threshold, she jumped lightly and tried to jump over it but tripped over her own feet. Her body lost her balance for a moment and was about to fall to the ground, but she was caught by a piece of softness. Thanks. Pei Zulu, who was slightly startled, was about to say thanks. When he looked up, he found that most of his field of vision was blocked. She shook her head, but then her expression became more and more sluggish, and she couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva and go down her throat. At this moment, there were only sporadic thoughts left in her mind. Want to drink. So big. Pei Zulu is already tall among children of the same age. But he is still a little potato, and he is still a fat potato with a fleshy face. Now when I hold my head high, I can only see mountains and mountains, not even the tails of the clouds in the sky. What on earth blinded me? It's really big. There was only one thought left in the little guy's mind. He was really shocked. He seemed to have roundworms in his stomach, and he was so greedy that he wanted to have love with the sister in front of him. And then coax her back home. Hey. Whose little girl are you from? With this soft greeting, Pei Zulu finally saw the face of the visitor clearly, and then she was stunned for a few breaths. Her little head couldn't find many words to describe the face in front of her. I could only blush and say with a purr, "Sister, you are so beautiful." One sentence also made Yu Baiwei's cheeks heat up. Her appearance was not the ultimate cold and coquettish beauty like Pei Zinan's. Instead, it was hard to tell what she was beautiful about, but no matter how you looked at it from which angle, they are all beautiful things that make people fall in love with them at a glance. Especially when she smiles sweetly, her romantic eyes like crimson peach blossoms are filled with unparalleled grace, which only reminds people of all the beautiful things they have seen in their lives. Even though he was used to seeing Pei Zinan's beautiful face, Pei Zulu looked at it several times before looking away and lowering his head, but immediately raised his head again and looked straight at it. This move made Yu Baiwei feel that this little guy she had never met before was even more cute, and he even looked a little similar to her stupid apprentice when he was a child. She also felt very friendly, which made Yu Baiwei couldn't help but start chatting. She liked children the most, especially those of this age. At first glance, they were more obedient and well-behaved than her apprentices. Little guy, what are you doing here? I'm playing with Shida and Shi'er. The little guy pointed to the two big stone lions at the door. Why do you call them Lion Big Lion 2? Because they are called Lion Big Lion 2. Quote. Yu Baiwei also has a very playful personality, and is often scolded by her disciples for being as stupid as a child. However, she didn't match this brain circuit for a while, so she asked, "Are you alone here? Isn't there still sister here?" Yu Baiwei blinked her peach blossom eyes, thinking that she didn't have much to say. She just thought that these parents were really big-hearted. What if they left such a naturally smart little baby outside and was kidnapped by others? Then do you want sister to take you home? No need. Pei Zulu shook his head like a rattle, suddenly lowered his voice and asked, "Sister Piao Niang, are you married?" Of course not. After getting this answer, the little guy was really relieved, and he mustered up the courage to ask, "Well, does Sister Piao Niang want to play with my dad?" Play together. When Leng Budding heard this, Yu Baiwei was also stunned. If other people asked this kind of topic when they met, she would never say another word to them, and she had even drawn her sword. But the words came out of the mouth of the little guy with sincere eyes in front of him. He couldn't get angry at all. Instead, he became concerned about her. "Where is your grandma?" "My grandma? I don't know." Pei Zulu paused, then shook his head without any psychological burden. "I don't have a grandma yet. If you ask, you just don't know." But this hesitation, in Yu Baiwei's eyes, turned out to be that this little girl had lost her mother long ago, or had left home and abandoned her husband and daughter, or was no longer alive. I felt sorry for this little guy for a moment. The life of a child without a mother is like a piece of grass. "Sister, I can't be friends with your father, but I can be friends with you. If nothing happens, just go home early." Yu Baiwei reached out and rubbed her head, stood up and walked into the courtyard on her own. There are thousands of sufferings and sorrows in the world, and it is extremely difficult to take care of a small family. Looking at the slim back that gradually disappeared from the field of vision, if the fox ears and tail on Pei Zulu's body had not disappeared, he would probably be shaking non-stop now, and he had already made a small calculation in his mind. Sister Piao Niang didn't refuse directly. If you want to be friends with me, why don't you just do it with my father? And Grandma is so stingy that she won't even let Daddy drink with her. If it were this Sister Piaozhang, Daddy and I would have to support each other every day. That's great. In fact, a child like her with complete teeth has long passed the age of drinking nigh, but this habit has been deeply ingrained. As for Yu Baiwei, who had already entered Fu Bo's courtyard, she didn't realize that she had been included in Pei Zulu's mother-in-law's list. She looked at the flowers and plants in the courtyard and fell into some kind of memory for a moment. During the more than 20 years on Zion Peak, the courtyard where she lived was also blooming with a vast array of colors. They were all seeds collected by Li Qingming, but he asked Uncle Fu to take care of them because he thought it was troublesome. Now seeing these similar colors here, she had a different feeling. It looks better than the ones on the peak. Quite a few. Perhaps because of his fluctuating mood, Uncle Fu suddenly caught sight of this familiar energy, and the hatchet in his hand fell to the ground with a bang. Little miss. Uncle Fu, Yu Baiwei smiled softly and greeted him as a greeting. Like Li Qingming, she regarded him as a real family member. Uncle Fu's hands trembled, and he looked back and forth several times, feeling sour in his heart. My lady has lost a lot of weight in the past 2 years. If Master Qingming sees her, he will definitely feel distressed. Snort. In front of Uncle Fu, this female swordswoman, whose status in Jojo Palace was so high that almost no one dared to offend her, revealed a bit of a girl's coquettishness. As for Xiao Lizzie, who has no conscience, do you still feel sorry for him? In the past 2 years or so, not even a letter was sent to me. I should have left him on the mountain as a wolf child. Unknowingly, her tone was a little aggrieved and she pouted. Master Qingming also didn't want Miss to worry too much. At that time, he didn't agree with Miss taking such a big risk. Uncle Fu comforted. Master Qingming has been thinking about Miss a lot these days. He looked up to the 2 children, one was in the palm of his hand and the other was in the back of his hand. Who knows if this little heartless guy is like this? Maybe he has been fascinated by some woman in the past 2 years and has forgotten me, the master, long ago. Yu Baiwei hummed, her eyebrows were twisted. The gentleness of the spring breeze. Master Qingming, Uncle Fu hesitated, and then he hesitated. He didn't know if Li Qingming was fascinated by any woman, but he even had a child. In a dilemma, Uncle Fu could only test first. Miss, haven't you gone to see Master Qingming yet? No, Yu Baiwei denied, with a bit of softness in her eyes. I'm going to give him a surprise. Li Qingming didn't know that he was about to receive a huge surprise. I don't even know if I will be more surprised than happy, or happy than surprised. At this time, he was still busy with various business plans in the study. While The Legend of White Snake and A Chinese Ghost Story were in full swing, he had to add a handful of firewood to make the fire burn brighter. Daddy, are you busy? Seeing a little face peeping out from the door, he put down the pen in his hand and said, no. Pei Zulu then jumped up and sat on Li Qingming's lap and glanced at the table several times. Dad, I'm telling you quietly, I just met a beautiful sister in front of my house. It's great. Big. Li Qingming didn't realize it and just nodded. How beautiful is it? It's very beautiful, super beautiful. It's almost as beautiful as Grandma. The little guy raised his hands and drew several big circles in the air, and it's even bigger. Li Qingming didn't really believe it. There were very few people in the world who could match Pei Zinan's appearance, but he still responded, really? Of course, I originally wanted to ask her if she wanted to be me. Before the little guy could finish her words, Li Qingming blocked her mouth and made a shushing gesture. When Pei Zulu saw it, he nodded his chin crazily and said with a smile on his face, I know, this is a little secret between my father and I, we have to keep it secret. Yes, I'll tell you secretly when I have the opportunity in the future. Li Qingming is very good at using this friend-like education method, and he doesn't want to see this little guy get spanked again for speaking out. In fact, it's not a question of whether to say it or not, the key is that he can't stop it. The dog witch girl knows how to use her cultivation to overwhelm others. Li Qingming. Pei Zinan's voice suddenly sounded in their ears. Li Qingming and the little guy were both startled, and each felt happy in their hearts. Yes, tell Cao Cao, Cao Cao arrives. Fortunately, I had already hidden my wife in advance. Say, Li Qingming said calmly. He would always put on airs in front of the little guy. Pei Zinan didn't care about this anyway. But today, it seems a little different. Feeling the ubiquitous chill in the air, Li Qingming glanced at Pei Zinan, and found that that beautiful face was filled with a soul-trembling cold. The key thing is that compared with before, this indifference has an extra emotion that he can't see through. Li Qingming didn't know what the witch was having, or if something big really happened, so he asked seriously, what happened? Double cultivation with me. Pei Zinan didn't speak, but 4 neat words suddenly sounded in Li Qingming's heart. He looked at Pei Zinan in surprise, whose face was still covered in frost, and then looked at the sky outside the window. It was still bright. What's more, he was holding the little guy in his arms. So Li Qingming shook his head decisively and refused, and at the same time, Pei Zinan's even colder voice sounded in his heart. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Li Qingming frowned and couldn't figure it out. She had just paid the public food, so why was this witch still hungry? He can't be an addict, right? Abnormality must be a monster. Li Qingming didn't know the reason, but he was already very vigilant and said as if nothing had happened, if you have something to say, I will continue to read the story to the little guy. Pei Zulu also looked at her father and mother from side to side, and felt that there was something strange today, so he tried to say, Mom, do you want to listen to my father tell stories with me? But Pei Zinan still had an expressionless face, like a mechanical doll with a broken clockwork, staring at Li Qingming. Double cultivation with me. Realizing that her voice transmission was a little more emotional, Li Qingming felt frightened and at the same time even more confused. When he wanted to speak, he saw that Pei Zinan had already grabbed his wrist with one hand. There was domineering and determination in his eyes that did not allow for any rejection. No, if you have something to say, just say it. Li Qingming was also helpless. Why did he fall in love with such a witch? It didn't make sense, so he let his own temper come to him every day. But as soon as he finished speaking, the strength in his wrist suddenly became 1,000 times stronger. Li Qingming knew that he couldn't avoid the mugwort acupuncture treatment, so he could only say this first. Good boy, you stay at home and read a book first. Dad will come back later. As soon as he finished speaking, he had already followed him to the midair in the courtyard, hovering in midair. Somehow, the wind is a bit harsh today. What kind of trick are you trying to do? Are you going to fly to the clouds? Li Qingming asked about the doubts in his heart, but he only received a cold look from Pei Zinan. I want to go to your master's boudoir again to practice dual cultivation with you. Question mark. You really shouldn't be in this barber shop. Li Qingming almost spit out a mouthful of blood from his chest. Do you really have some weird quirks like this witch? This time, Pei Zinan did not respond. Quirk, maybe. But, she lowered her head and looked towards the courtyard, which had become as small as a palm, with some morbid determination in her eyes. You, Li Qingming, can only be my plaything, Pei Zinan. How many times have you said this before you get tired of it? No one can take you away from me. The wind was a bit strong, and Li Qingming couldn't hear her words clearly. What? He just felt that the witch was really having a seizure today. She had to use flying ones even though she had spells like teleportation, and she was mumbling as if she was having a seizure. And how did he know that at the moment when the two of them appeared in the sky and paused, Yu Baiwei in the courtyard next door trembled all over, her eyes were stern, and she suddenly shot away into the sky. He left an instruction with a vague ending, Uncle Fu, I'll be back as soon as I go. But there was also a streak of white fluorescence high in the sky, chasing the two people who had become flashes and floated. Inside the room. Goodbye, Daddy, the little guy is really well behaved. She is very attached to Li Qingming, but she always knows not to disturb her daddy. After Li Qingming left, the little one sat at the table obediently, flipping through the picture books that Li Qingming had filled a whole bookcase for her. Since the birth of Pei Zulu, the bookcases in Li Qingming's study can only accommodate various children's books. A gust of wind happened to blow through the open wooden window, blowing away some stacked papers on Li Qingming's table, and they were about to be blown away. "Ha, it's so dangerous." The little guy reached out and grabbed it with great sensitivity, put it on the table and held it down with a paperweight. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the drawing paper that was originally covered by the paper. "Hey, the sister in this painting." Seeing the human face on the drawing paper, Pei Zulu couldn't help but tilt his head, put his finger in his mouth and bit it. "Why does it look so much like Sister Piao Niang I just met? Ah, she is Yu Baiwei, my father's liger." Surprise. Not to mention Li Qingming, even Uncle Fu, who had heard it with his own ears, didn't know who would be happy or surprised. 2.5 years, in a monk's long life, is equivalent to just taking a nap, which is not worth mentioning, but in this short period of time, changes comparable to the sea and stone will occur. Young Master Qingming doesn't know that the young lady has arrived home safely, and the young lady doesn't know that he is now a father. If they meet by then, I guess everyone will be pleasantly surprised. Fu Bo thought happily in his heart, and even began to look forward to the scene where the 3 generations of master and apprentice would be happy. He decided not to tell Yu Baiwei the good news first, but instead mentioned something. "If Miss wants to see Master Qingming, please take the snacks here with me. This box is for the young lady, and this box belongs to Master Qingming." In Uncle Fu's opinion, a box of pastries is enough for his young lady to have a good relationship with the little guy. When the time comes, he calls out, "Master," and "Master," one after another, and now he almost laughs just by imagining it. Face full of wrinkles. Dessert. As soon as Yu Baiwei saw the snack box in front of her, her peach blossom eyes turned into crescent moon smiles. She reached out and subconsciously wanted to open the box and taste it, even though her unfilial apprentice also stocked up a mountain of it before leaving home more than 2 years ago. "Eat some snacks, but finish everything early." "Forget it." Kay just opened the lid, and Yu Baiwei suddenly stopped and put it back. "I'll let him feed me after I meet Little Plum." Seeing this scene, Uncle Fu felt extremely emotional. The friendship between the master and apprentice he had watched grow up was naturally deep, but it would be more appropriate to say that they were playmates rather than master and apprentice. His young lady is a few years older than Li Qingming, but because of her greedy and playful nature, she has been half-spoiled by Li Qingming since she was a child. If there is anything fun to do together, and if there is anything delicious, we must give each other a taste first. Later, behind the two of them, there was a little Zhang family oil bottle who was cold-faced and silent every day. It was exactly like this that when Li Qingming had such an accident, Yu Baiwei dragged the giant sword of the founder of Xianfang without saying a word, blocked him directly in front of the palace of the Lord of Zhouzhou Palace, and made a big fuss. Just to ask for an explanation, otherwise the plaque of Zhouzhou Palace will be demolished. Later, she persuaded her to stop, but she turned around and left Zhouzhou Palace, wandering around secret places just to help her disciple find another chance to find immortality. The dangers involved need not be explained. At that time, Li Qingming also got angry for this. What a big fire. Thinking about the past, Uncle Fu also lamented that things and people have changed, so he wanted to speak, but suddenly he noticed a sudden change in Yu Baiwei's energy. She left a sentence of, "Uncle Fu, I'll go and come back," and then disappeared. "Miss, your cultivation has improved a lot, you are really old." Uncle Fu was stunned for a moment, then a few wry smiles appeared on his face, his eyes followed the distant sky and became far away. "It's still a matter of young people. Let the young people solve it themselves. There are some things that an old man of his age would see in his eyes, keep in his heart, and never say anything about. How could that witch appear here?" Yu Baiwei frowned, with a look of worry on her face. Why did she kidnap Little Plum? Why did she have to reveal her own energy? And why is this direction towards Zion Peak? Her heart was blocked by many doubts for a while, and Yu Baiwei's figure flickered faster and faster. She was really worried about Li Qingming's safety. "If you dare to touch a hair on his body, I, Yu Baiwei, will chase you to Juyu Wangquan. I will definitely kill you." Li Qingming was also very worried about his own safety at this time. He really couldn't guess what kind of stimulation Pei Zinan received that made him rush through the Zhouzhou Palace without any regard for his energy. "Are you afraid that others won't know that you, a demon sect witch, can come and go freely in the sect of the leader of the righteous path? In the world of spiritual practice, there is nothing more provocative than this. It's like you are obviously a wanted criminal and don't want to live quietly, but you still go to Hangdian to perform small roles every day, and finally become a popular supporting role in major popular movies and TV series. The only difference is that neither the Jojo Palace monks who noticed this coquettish aura and looked up, nor Yu Baiwei who kept chasing after him, found it difficult to catch up. Sensing the figure high in the sky that looked like a firefly in the dark night, many disciples in the Jojo Palace were at a loss. The demon gate has invaded. Or is it that some great demon has gone too far in his cultivation and come to my Jojo Palace to seek death? Could it be that the war between good and evil is about to start again? Then I have to go and stock up on a few bags of salt first. Ha ha ha, if I'm not mistaken, the person captured by the demon is Xianfeng Li Qingming. True and false. Melon seeds and peanut sparkling water, does anyone want it? Wait a minute, the one at the back is Xian Peak, the Peak Master. When did this ancestor come back? As soon as someone mentioned this taboo-like title, most of the disciples immediately fell silent, for fear of being implicated. Who didn't know that this Peak Master, whose seniority and status in Jojo Palace was terrifying, was protecting the calf? It can't be stopped either. Xian Peak is doing business, and those who are idle should keep away. The ensuing roar made them lose all intention of joining in the fun. Now from such a distance, the murderous intent makes people tremble. If in the past, innocent people were harmed just to watch the fun, then there is really no reason to explain. Just, what happened? What happened? Li Qingming said he didn't know either. Okay, I saw Pei Zinan having a convulsion, flying all the way high in the sky, and now he is on Xian Peak again. After rolling down, he realized that he was on the big bed in his master's boudoir again. Li Qingming still asked patiently, Pei Zinan, what are you planning on doing? Is it okay to talk about something? I told you. Pei Zinan still looked so indifferent that he had lost all his emotions and desires. I want you and me to practice together. He. Li Qingming was so depressed that his heart was about to burst. If he could believe Pei Zinan's words, his life would have been in vain. Pei Zinan was not joking. With a swipe of his fingernails, Li Qingming's upper garment was untied. At the same time, a gentle scolding that sounded murderous sounded outside the house, but it was only confined to the courtyard. Which? Li Qingming suddenly paused, and then he saw the door was smashed into pieces with a sword. The pieces flew everywhere, and pieces of smoke and dust fell, making it a mess in an instant. And the invisible waves caused by the sword energy also lifted the bed curtains. Li Qingming, who was half propped up on the bed, was stunned. Looking at the figure who was slightly thinner than before in the smoke and dust, he couldn't calm down for a long time. I saw Yu Baiwei lightly lifting a green blade 3 feet away, pointing at Pei Zinan in the distance. Her eyes were like peach blossoms and flowing water, but they were also as cold as winter. Pei Zinan, let go, my disciple. This outline and this timbre allowed Li Qingming to confirm the identity of the person coming. It was his master Yu Baiwei, whom he had not seen for more than 2 years. Quote exclamation mark quote. Master. Li Qingming seemed to be sleeping so hard in winter that he couldn't keep his eyes open, but someone poured cold water on him. It also seemed like he secretly went online to have love with his brother while his wife was away on a business trip. When the screen turned black, the screen suddenly turned black. One black. Anyway, it was a shiver. Broken. Caught raped in bed. Wait, what am I guilty of? I was just dueling with the witch, and accidentally ended up in my master's room while fighting, and then accidentally ended up on the bed again while fighting. Even though he was thinking this way, Li Qingming was still embarrassed from head to toe and felt at a loss. He even had the feeling of urgency that he felt when the bell suddenly rang when he was almost able to solve the last big question in the math test in his previous life. If there was a crack at this time, Li Qingming would definitely get in first to avoid the limelight. In fact, there is, but it's not quite suitable. Therefore, Li Qingming could only tie up his clothes with trembling hands, and then let the two of them sit down and talk. There should be a day like this. Li Qingming thought very thoroughly, but Pei Zinan didn't think so. Pei Zinan, who had been as cold as ice just now, suddenly had a bright and light smile on his face. Yu Baiwei, if I don't let you go, what can you do? As she said that, she lowered her head and pecked Li Qingming on the face. Li Qingming wanted to hide, but couldn't. Pei Zinan. There was a bright white light beside the door, and a sword energy shot out, illuminating every part of the room, reflecting thousands of awe-inspiring murderous intentions, like a white rainbow penetrating the sun. The sword energy was so fast and majestic that it was about to fall on Pei Zinan, but it turned around and landed on a stone pillar on one side, causing cracks like spider webs to spread in an instant. Look, it's just that your disciple is by my side, and you don't even dare to attack me with your sword energy. Seeing this scene, Pei Zinan's tone was lighthearted and teasing, but his expression became even colder. With just one word, Yu Baiwei's fingers holding the sword hilt became even redder. She has never been good at refuting, let alone a witch like Pei Zinan who is the best at manipulating people's hearts. Li Qingming has no doubt that this witch can make the master so angry that he smokes with his mouth. You guys calm down first. Li Qingming tried to reconcile it, but was kicked lightly by Pei Zinan. A year ago, you hurt me at that ruins. Today I will return this revenge to your precious disciple, peck and drink myself. There is destiny. Witch, how can you still be so confident when you use such dirty tricks to steal an ancient secret from me? Oh, you also lost to me once. It's you, a witch, who is so unscrupulous. Do I win or not? You. The two women were performing on the same stage, and before they even got to the dressing room, they were already fighting openly and secretly. No, my precious master, how can you possibly win a quarrel like this? Li Qingming looked on anxiously, his head was as big as a fight. At the same time, he realized in their words that the two of them had been at odds before, and now their hatred was compounded, and it was impossible to talk calmly. Let go of my disciple, I will spare your life today. Yu Baiwei couldn't win, so she had to raise her sword. If others find out, wouldn't my disciple's innocence be ruined by you, a witch like you? Clean. Pei Zinan raised his eyebrows, stared at Li Qingming who suddenly suppressed all expressions, and said leisurely, Yu Baiwei, your disciple's innocence. She paused and said in a show-off manner, your disciple's innocence was destroyed by me more than 2 years ago. He is now my plaything. Yu Baiwei's hands trembled again, and even her voice sounded a little unsteady. Witch, you must stop talking nonsense. Do not believe. The smile on Pei Zinan's face was actually a little softer than spring. Not only is he innocent, I also gave birth to a daughter through him. You have seen it today. Do you think my daughter is somewhat similar to him? You can't help but feel close to him. Pei Zinan spoke leisurely, but Yu Baiwei turned pale the more she listened. She knew that this witch had no reason to deceive her at this moment. My disciple's innocence was really ruined by this witch, and he even gave birth to such a cute little guy. Unknowingly, Yu Baiwei's heart slowly lifted up, as if she was suspended on an ice cliff, surrounded by wind and snow like a bone-scratching knife, and beneath it was a deep abyss. She turned to look at Li Qingming in a daze, and pursed her lips twice. She wanted to say something, but it seemed as if she had been completely cut off by some secret method, and her brain was just a blank. She wanted to ask Li Qingming something, but she couldn't ask anything. She just felt that she was really stupid. At this moment, Yu Baiwei suddenly hated herself for being stupid. But she was still so stupid that her nose hurt, and she was so stupid that she just bit her lip. Some feelings are so heavy that even opening your lips is as heavy as a stone. How can we say it out loud? Before a moment had passed, the atmosphere in the room was already as dull as mud. Li Qingming's heart was also filled with panic. He and Yu Baiwei had been together for more than 20 years, and there was no need to explain their feelings for each other. But who could have predicted that he would meet Pei Zinan and give birth to Pei Zulu? Master, Li Qingming took a deep breath. Before he could say anything, he saw that Yu Baiwei seemed to have collected all his emotions and pointed his sword at Pei Zinan again. Which, Yu Baiwei, will definitely kill you with the sword today. You stupid woman with no brains, you will die today. As soon as the two girls finished speaking, Li Qingming was the only one left in the messy house. He got up hastily and rushed outside the house, only to see two figures in the sky colliding with each other. Seen from a distance, it looks like two fires of different colors. It is impossible to tell which one is brighter and which one is more fiery. They are just entangled together, constantly emitting a slight stream of light. Stop fighting, don't fight anymore. Li Qingming looked so worried and panicked that he shouted twice without knowing it in the courtyard. With their cultivation, they can naturally hear, but hearing and listening are two different things. Li Qingming looked around and couldn't find any useful tools, and his heart was already in a mess. As an innocent male swordsman, if he encounters this kind of sheer field, what can he do? Fortunately, he didn't really lose all his sense. Li Qingming always remembered the saying, after watching 1,000 movies, you will find that there is nothing weird in the world. There is a solution to everything. If something is extraordinary, use extraordinary methods to solve it. Li Qingming let out a breath and ran to the cliff of Xian Peak. He looked at the cold and mist-shrouded peak, and secretly cursed, Flag is really riding a horse and can't stand randomly. Today at Xian Peak, he has to jump. Let's see if you can still fight. Li Qingming gritted his teeth and jumped down, finally achieving the flag he set in Chapter 16. The source of this dispute is himself. Li Qingming was very aware of the current situation, and also knew that he could not separate his master from the demon girl at all. It is impossible to persuade. Sleepwear is naturally even more unrealistic. Then he could only look for simple measures that could take immediate effect. Li Qingming looked around and made a decision immediately. Just as Pei Zinan often said that he was a plaything in her hands, regardless of whether she had love or not, the enchantress had a completely paranoid possessive desire for him, and was so arrogant that she could not make any sense. And his master, when he saw that he was injured since he was a child, it seemed as if the sky was falling. If he was accidentally injured while practicing, he would laugh and laugh at him, but he would take out all kinds of miraculous elixirs, and if he was bullied by other disciples with higher realms, he would have to drag the big sword and block it. People went to Shanman. Both of them don't want to see themselves die, so I will force them to die. Who says that only women can force someone to death? Can't we boys be a little willful once in a while? We boys also need love and pampering, okay. Although it was a bit useless for him to look at him like this, Li Qingming couldn't care so much. If he didn't do this, he would have let him continue to perform abstractly. If you don't mention rain, how can you express that it's raining heavily? Or should he just watch the two of them fight to the death? Before taking off, Li Qingming even did a couple of simple run-ups. He just regretted that Xian Peak was not steep enough. With his body, he would not die from this jump, but serious injuries were inevitable. From the surface, Xian Peak just looks like a towering and steep peak, but it can be regarded as the most special line in Jojo Palace. The main body of this peak alone has long been cultivated by various natural materials to form some kind of Futian cave. Later, under the control of Li Qingming, some kind of important war weapon was made into a living weapon, and various defensive formations were arranged on it to prepare for a rainy day and never be too late. Every year, there are many accidents in which disciples of Jojo Palace fly swords under the influence of alcohol and fall into Xian Peak and are seriously injured. Li Qingming was really prepared to risk half his life by jumping. But feeling the wind whistling by his ears, Li Qingming still looked at the patches of swordlight in the night sky with a sense of leisure and ease, shattering those dark clouds into pieces as they flickered. Then there was a burst of vast brilliance, as if cutting the dome in half, breaking through the night in this area, causing the stars to dim one after another under its brilliant light. The battle between the monks who transformed themselves into gods was extremely simple, but at the same time it was extremely majestic. Even the sky and the earth changed color during the confrontation between the two women. It was just the aftermath that spread, so far away, it still made people feel heart-stopping. Li Qingming also had a look of surprise and envy in his eyes. If the accident hadn't happened at that time, he would still be able to deal with it now. Maybe the monk's body was no longer a mortal body. Due to inertia, he fell a little faster than he thought, and he came into contact with those defensive formations earlier. Phew, stab, click. With a few sounds, Li Qingming turned into ragged clothes, blood splattered all over his body, and the bones in his body made a sound like beans cracking. It's so painful. Why did I have to do these formation-breaking techniques with my brain in the first place? Li Qingming, who was hit by the boomerang, grimaced in pain, and the corners of his mouth were covered with blood foam. He looked much more miserable than when he was captured by the demon woman in the secret realm. You two should really stop fighting. Before we can decide the outcome, my life will be lost first. Li Qingming was thinking quietly in his heart, but he didn't worry too much. After the last collision, those stern swords in the night sky suddenly dispersed, and the light spots turned into rain and fell to the ground all over the sky. The frightening power of the confrontation also receded like a tide, returning the night sky to night. Then two streams of light dragged their long light tails and fell rapidly. Like two parallel lines, there is no longer any entanglement and communication. Almost instantly, Pei Zinan and Yu Baiwei fell to Li Qingming's side, one on the left and one on the right, each holding his arm to prevent him from falling. At this moment, the eyes of the two women met again, but they were completely separated when they touched each other. The injuries visible to the naked eye on Li Qingming's body no longer allowed them to continue to distinguish between life and death. Idiot, Pei Zinan cursed and looked even grimmer than before. On the other hand, Yu Baiwei on the other side was already like an ant on a hot pot. Her eyes were so red that they were filled with tears. She was hurriedly taking out various healing medicines, but her hands were shaking because of excessive worry. One pill will drop a whole bottle, take one bottle and drop 2 bottles. He finally managed to steady his hand and was about to stuff the pill into Li Qingming's mouth, but his hand was slapped by Pei Zinan. At this time, she didn't have the dignity of the so-called majestic Jojo Palace sword immortal. She looked more like a little girl lost on the street. She had even forgotten to open her mouth to refute Pei Zinan. If you take these medicines, he will be fed to death even if he falls to death. When Yu Baiwei heard this, her hands trembled even more, and a bunch of precious medicines fell out of her hands. She didn't know what spiritual creature in Zion Peak would take away this opportunity. Pei Zinan's tone was full of Kai Guguo's disdain. What a family of idiots. They are hopelessly stupid. Li Qingming, who still had some clarity, heard this intermittently, and then he opened his mouth, and the blood surged up like a torrent without a gate. Don't make any more noise. He couldn't finish a sentence, then he simply closed his eyelids and fainted. This scene made Yu Baiwei so anxious that she could hardly keep her balance, so she got another look from Pei Zinan, and then watched helplessly as she picked up her disciple by the waist and headed towards the courtyard at the top of the mountain. Yu Baiwei shook her head and then hurriedly followed. She watched from a distance as Pei Zinan hugged Li Qingming and fell to the ground, dragging it into a long shadow. The sourness that made her chest tight surged again, as if it took away all her cultivation. Even the spiritual power to keep out the cold was gone, and even his voice was trembling. Yao. Pei Zinan. Explain. Pei Zinan paused but did not look back. Yu Baiwei was unable to express her feelings at this moment, feeling a little confused and at a loss. It seemed like it was something she had been preparing for a long time, for which she had spent countless energy and shed countless tears and sweat. Before he did it, at a certain point, in an extremely abrupt way. Stopped abruptly. There is no end. It was like tearing a freshly scabbed wound. While tearing off the scab, it also tore off a piece of new flesh with blood and skin. You really like my disciple. Yu Baiwei stiffened her body, and even the words she spoke seemed to be a little stiff. Right, Yu Baiwei didn't get the answer to this question. Pei Zinan did not open his mouth to answer this question. But both of them seemed to have gotten their own answers. Sometimes, it is really difficult to distinguish right from wrong, let alone separate the skin, flesh and bones like a specimen. Skin and flesh are skin and flesh, and bones are bones. But fortunately, things always develop in the direction Li Qingming wants. As a light rain fell at night, the aftermath of last night's fight seemed to be taken away by the clearing sky after the rain. It's just that the sky was sunny this time, and it only lasted for half an hour. Then it started raining heavily again. The rainwater flowed down the eaves, beating the wind chimes under the eaves slightly. Yu Baiwei stood here quietly for the whole night, without taking a step into the house. She just silently felt that Li Qingming's breath in the house changed from weak and messy to gradually calmer, and then she exhaled. From the beginning to the end, she was most concerned about Li Qingming's safety. In other words, she has been caring about his safety all her life. Ever since she was traveling in the mortal world and picked up Li Qingming with his big eyes in the barrel that day when she was a child, she seemed to have focused her entire heart on this frail baby. She still remembers what Uncle Fu asked her at that time: if Miss decides to take him back, she will never abandon him again. She will also have to shoulder all the responsibilities that his parents should have fulfilled but failed to fulfill. Responsibility. Even if the young lady has fun, she will share it with him, and if she has delicious food, she will share it with him. Whatever she has, she will miss him. Yu Baiwei, who was only 5 or 6 years old, didn't understand this. She was instinctively afraid, but when she saw him reaching out towards her, she took a step forward. Let that tender little hand hold you. This pull has brought us to the present. It was cold, but it made her feel a little warm, so she turned to Uncle Fu and asked, "Then can I keep a little bit for myself? I'll give him the fun stuff, but I'll keep a little bit, and I'll give him the delicious stuff too, but still leave a little for me." But just after she asked, she suddenly shook her head like a rattle. "If he likes it, I'd better give it all to him." "Miss, are you really willing to give up?" "Unwilling. That, HMPH, if he disobeys me in the future, then I, as the master, will have to teach him a lesson." The lesson she vowed to say at that time. When Li Qingming got older, she, Yu Baiwei, became the one who was taught the lesson. "Yu Baiwei, I told you that the steamed fish is not yet cooked, why did you steal it for me? Yu Baiwei, you are the master of a peak after all. Can you stop leaving all these things to your apprentice me to do every day? Yu Baiwei, don't sleep. The palace master has called you to attend the apprenticeship ceremony." Yu Baiwei. As a master, she has no face at all in front of her disciples, but she is always taken care of by her disciples. "Xiao Lizzie, I want to wear new and beautiful clothes for my teacher." "Xiao Lizzie, my master is hungry again. Go and cook quickly. I want 4 dishes and 1 soup, 2 meat and 2 vegetables." "Xiao Lizzie, I want to see the fireworks you mentioned." "Little Plum," Li Qingming said to her Yu Baiwei. "It is responsive to requests." And she had gotten used to this a long time ago. She had always been happy to be a lazy master who had no airs and only knew how to sleep in, eat, drink and have fun. It was best to be a lifelong master. It wasn't until that year when she saw Li Qingming, who had no trace of cultivation left on him and was in a state of utter disarray, that she realized how incompetent she was as a master. During this period, no matter how deep the crisis was in the secret realm, Yu Baiwei never had any thoughts of giving up. "He is my disciple. If I don't love him and protect him, who will?" At this time, it seems that new people can do this. These random thoughts in her head made Yu Baiwei feel that she seemed even more stupid. Even the fresh air after the rain fell into her mouth and nose, which was a pain that made her suffocate. She raised her head and looked around under the eaves. Everywhere she looked, there were shadows of her and Li Qingming's past. There was no place in the huge Zion Peak that their master and apprentice had not been before. But why has she become so strange after being away for more than 2 years? On the contrary, the courtyard in Linan City is more like what a home should look like. After thinking about this, Yu Baiwei's body swayed and she was already standing in front of Li Qingming's courtyard in Linan City, wondering what the difference was. Before she even took a step, she heard a surprise sound of milky milk. "Sister Baiwei." There was a cute little guy in his eyes, and Yu Baiwei's mood became sour and unspeakable. Such a cute little girl is the child of her disciple Li Qingming, and also her disciple and grandson. After thinking about this, Yu Baiwei's brain fell into confusion again. Not even Pei Zulu's voice of concern was heard. "Hey, sister, why are you crying?" "Sister, don't cry. I have a gift for you." When she came to her senses again, the little guy in front of her was already stained with some rainwater, and there were even a few beads hanging from her forehead. "Sister, look, sister, look." Pei Zulu spread out the drawing paper in his arms and unfolded the gentle and smiling pretty face in front of Yu Baiwei. "Daddy painted my sister so beautifully." The little guy's voice was a little artificial, but it only made people feel extra cute. Even Yu Baiwei had a little smile on her face. "Is this your father's painting?" Yu Baiwei stared blankly at herself on the drawing paper, as if she was no longer so stupid. Yes, the little guy nodded, hitting the track while it was hot. "Sister, do you know what this means?" "Wah, what?" "It means that my father has a sister in his heart." Pei Zulu's tone was quite mysterious, mixed with some excitement, but he accidentally dropped another roll of drawing paper in his arms. Yu Baiwei held it up and handed it to her. The little guy wanted to praise his father a lot, so he opened the drawing paper and showed off. "Sister, let me show you, this is the whole family that my father drew." "Pot, doesn't it look good?" Yu Baiwei's expression froze, her heart clenched, and after a while she asked, "Little guy, what did you just say the scroll represents?" "It means that my father has a sister in his heart." Pei Zulu answered quickly, thinking that he was afraid that he would be praised severely by his father again. Sister, come and be a family member with me. But it still took a long time before she got a reply from Sister Piao Niang. But there is no sister in our family, little one. Yu Baiwei responded softly, with bright smiles but a little terror in her eyes. No sister for you. Looking at the eldest sister in front of him who secretly dropped the pearls just like he usually did after being spanked by his mother-in-law, Pei Zulu scratched his ears as if he saw himself. Why are you as stupid as me? Big sister, wouldn't it be great if I just asked my father to draw another one for you? I'll ask my dad to paint when he comes back. I'll paint you a big and beautiful painting. Pei, say what you have to say, Zulu decided directly. He raised his hand and drew a half circle, giving a thumbs up to his wit. Where am I stupid? Such an innocent scene also made Yu Baiwei feel relieved for a moment. Yes, now is now, I am not in the painting and I do not define the future. But it was only for a moment. Anyone can deceive her, but she can't. She stared blankly at the little guy who was still struggling to please her, and in a daze she seemed to see Li Qingming, who had made her cry, and then had a look of uneasiness on his face while hurriedly trying to cheer him up. Yu Baiwei suddenly realized that the oath she had said as a joke when she was young had already lost most of its color with the passage of time, leaving only mottled spots. She and him were just master and disciple from the beginning. Even though my heart was once full of softness and enthusiasm, in front of this shackles, it was just a cold abyss. If it crossed the line a little, it would fall straight down. No matter how sweet the words are, they are all lies. Big sister, please stop, don't be sad, Pei Zulu cried anxiously when he realized that no matter what he said, he couldn't make this big sister stop crying. While crying, she stretched out her hand to wipe the tears on Yu Baiwei's cheek. This childish cry suddenly caused Yu Baiwei to break free from the muddy pool, and said with a smile, Sister, you are not sad. Really, really, Yu Baiwei replied. Her eyes were still red, but she no longer shed tears. I haven't asked you yet, why do you call me big sister? Ah, the little guy sniffed and murmured for a long time without giving out the reason. But Yu Baiwei didn't care anymore and wiped away the tears on Pei Zulu's face with her white sleeves. I am your father's master, you should call me master. No, can't I call you sister? How about Sister Shizu? Pei Zulu was a little reluctant. If she couldn't call her sister, how could she change her name to Anyang in the future? Yu Baiwei shook her head gently, all the emotions on her face had been suppressed, and her tone was soft but firm. Sister is sister, master is master, the rules are insurmountable. She was telling the little guy this. It sounds more like I am speaking to myself. But who is Pei Zulu? She is a smart and witty little girl. I saw her nodding her head and shouting, I know, sister master. PFF. Yu Baiwei finally couldn't help but laugh, showing a smile from the bottom of her heart. There are too many things in this world. It's all lies. Worse still, they deceive themselves and others. Just like Pei Zenin at this moment. Yu Baiwei stood outside the house all night. She stayed by the bed all night and was on guard all night. She is not such an irrational person. Even if she behaves erratically and evilly, she will never lose her mind and act like crazy like she did last night. Just catching a trace of Yu Baiwei's energy that accidentally leaked out, an unprecedented fear that made her tremble and tremble, directly pulled her down into the deep and bitter pool, almost causing her to drown. That woman is back. The most important woman to Li Qingming in his life, his master Yu Baiwei, is back. Faintly, she seemed to feel the emotion called timidity for the first time. Pei Zenin once asked Li Qingming who was more beautiful between her and his master. At that time, Li Qingming's answer was her, but Pei Zenin knew better than anyone that in Li Qingming's heart, he could never compare to his master. How can we be qualified to compare? The fireworks called fear burned from her heart to her limbs in a short period of time, then spread to her eyebrows and ignited the ends of her hair. Pei Zenin had rarely been so irritable before, it was so irritable that she almost went crazy. Therefore, she wants everyone in Jojo Palace to know. The dignified Li Qingming has long been her prisoner. She even wanted Yu Baiwei to know. Your disciple has long been my plaything. That's what she said to Li Qingming, no one can take you away. But looking at Li Qingming, whose aura was stable at this time, but still showing that he was weak to the core, Panic and uneasiness and regret suddenly surged into him, and then completely suppressed the former and surged up. Pei Zinan actually felt that the corners of his lips were dry and he could not sit still. What really made her panic was that a thought gradually lingered in her mind and she could never forget it. If Li Qingming really died like this? Pei Zinan did not dare to think further. Just one thought almost drained all the strength from her body. Only then did she realize that she had been lying to herself all along. Ahem. A few coughs from beside her pulled her out of her thoughts. Pei Zinan's face was filled with tension for a moment, but when she saw Li Qingming on the bed, his eyelids trembled a few times and he was about to open his eyes, she became that emotionless iceberg again. His face was a bit bored. Li Qingming did not notice this. He stared at the top of the bed curtain for a few seconds, his vision gradually became clearer from confusion, and he secretly rejoiced in his heart, it's not easy to survive. The bet was a bet, but he was not sure whether the two women would still fight for the right to treatment after he was seriously injured and fainted. If he was hit on the head, then he would really have no place to complain. The feeling of being alive is so wonderful. After feeling the injuries on his body for a moment, Li Qingming secretly breathed a sigh of relief, and he roughly knew what was going to happen next. Even if my stupid master is higher in cultivation, he will never be able to get an advantage from Pei Zinan. He turned his head and saw Pei Zinan's iceberg face and a faint word. Woke up. Li Qingming responded weakly, hesitated, and then asked, are you okay? In fact, Li Qingming is not a straight man, but he is used to being loose and out of touch. In his eyes, there is no distinction between high and low emotional intelligence. The only difference is that they are just people. Different people naturally have different ways of getting along with each other. He is unwilling to be suppressed by Pei Zinan, so he will always confront my Meng tit for tat, not wanting to lose a word. However, today is different from the past. With the current situation, he can no longer be the same as before, and his attitude should be softer. If harmony is the most important thing, everything will be prosperous if the family is harmonious. But after he said this sentence, the room suddenly fell into a suppressed silence. Li Qingming didn't see any surprise or softness on Pei Zinan's face. The latter's expression was cold and made him a little embarrassed. What came out of his mouth was also a cold word. Laugh. You think I'm worse than your precious master? In one sentence, all Li Qingming's prepared remarks were blocked. I'm so gentle. Yes, you are worse than my master, 1,000 times, 10,000 times worse. Dog witch, you can't play your cards according to the routine, right? After cursing in his heart, Li Qingming finally felt a little more comfortable. When he raised his eyes, he noticed a faint smile on the corner of Pei Zinan's mouth, and realized that he was being played by this witch again. Another burst of slander. Tsunere, you are Tsunere. Don't you know that Tsunere has long been withdrawn from the market? The more arrogant you are, the more you will cry in the future. But in the end, Li Qingming still pretended to know nothing, responded with a cold snort and turned away as usual. For the time being, let's coax this witch. Seeing that Li Qingming was still the same as before, Pei Zinan finally felt at ease. The smile on the corner of his mouth was like a blooming rose, delicate and beautiful but with a few sharp thorns. Even though he knew there was danger, he still couldn't help but touch this temptation with his fingers. But no matter how beautiful and proud the rose is, there is a time when it can put away its sharp thorns. You've been lying down all day, but are you hungry? Pei Zinan's eyes have been firmly fixed on Li Qingming since last night, never leaving him for a moment. At this time, all the melancholy has retreated, and his eyes have become filled with light tenderness. Li Qingming and Pei Zulu did not eat just to satisfy their appetites like she did. They both needed the medicinal properties in the spiritual food to nourish their bodies. Especially Li Qingming, who had a good physique but no cultivation at all. The former becomes a burden, constantly consuming the body's spiritual energy like a blood-sucking leech. As time goes by, the body will become more and more deficient. It is actually not nonsense to say that Li Qingming is imaginary. I'm hungry, I want to drink. Li Qingming was used to asking for trouble when he said something worse, so he quickly changed his words, I want to drink some water. Pei Zinan was too lazy to do anything, thinking that he would just endure it for today. There is no shortage of precious materials and spiritual treasures on Zion Peak, and the spiritual spring is full of spiritual charm. Not long after, Pei Zinan came back with a container of spiritual spring, and he also thoughtfully took a cup with a handle on the table in the room. You can drink. Hearing her say this, Li Qingming turned his head again, and then looked at the cup in Pei Zinan's hand with a dark expression on his face. It's very difficult for him to even turn his head now, and he really can't even think about raising his hands. Such a scene only made Pei Zinan feel that Li Qingming was deliberately irritating him again, so he endured a little impatience and asked, "Why don't you pick it up?" "I said I was thirsty, so I went to pick up Lingquan. What do you want from me?" Quote, "Do you think I can raise my hand to take it now?" Li Qingming responded quietly, and the scene was a little quiet for a while. After a few breaths, Pei Zinan's response sounded in the room, "If you don't tell me, how can I know?" Quote. Li Qingming took a deep breath, feeling a pain in his lungs. He coughed several times and said, "Help me up." Pei Zinan is not the kind of person who obeys her orders. She only likes to have others obey her orders. At this time, she somehow didn't even hesitate. She put down the cup and supported Li Qingming's back against the cushion at the head of the bed. Not only did he move cautiously, as gently as he picked up a piece of tissue paper soaked in water, he even thoughtfully placed a pillow under Li Qingming's waist. It's not what's on Yu Baiwei's bed, but the belongings she usually puts in storage, tainted with the faint fragrance of her body. Never doubt a woman's pettiness anytime and anywhere. Li Qingming kept these things in his eyes and opened his mouth without saying a word. Who would have known that this enchantress was becoming more and more soft-hearted without realizing it? But how do others know that soft-heartedness is the emotion that Pei Zinan has always considered to be the most useless? Drink. After placing Li Qingming in place, Pei Zinan handed the water glass in her hand, pointed it directly at Li Qingming's lips, and then turned her wrist. There was already a hint of impatience on her face. Being soft-hearted is softening the heart, but not much. Cough cough cough. Li Qingming was choked directly, coughed again, and almost spit out a few mouthfuls of blood. He cursed himself in his heart, "I'm really crazy. How can she, a witch, know how to take care of people? Don't take care of me. Take care of me to death." Pei Zinan felt a little unbearable in her heart, but she still stood there. When Li Qingming stopped coughing, she spoke again, "Do you still want to drink?" By taking care of Li Qingming like this, she was doing her best. "It's too cold, go and heat up the spiritual spring." Li Qingming also tried his best to calm her. This tone of giving orders made Pei Zinan instinctively feel unhappy, and his brows even furrowed. He hesitated for a while, then turned around and did as Li Qingming ordered. But how could Li Qingming, who finally had the opportunity to call her, stop there? He uses the witch as a maid. Wait a minute, remember to use pear-scented wood to burn it. I have a lot of it in the woodshed outside. Exclamation mark. Pei Zinan paused for a moment and already had the urge to turn back. However, he heard Li Qingming's weak cough behind him and continued walking. And when she put the hot spring to Li Qingming's lips, the latter frowned and said, "It's so hot, don't you know how to blow on it first?" As soon as the words fell, there was a click. The quilt in Pei Zinan's hand was instantly covered with cracks. Fortunately, it was controlled in time, otherwise Li Qingming would have ended up like a drowned rat. And it's still falling hot. Li Qingming was also frightened. He, old Li, could be wrong, but Xiao Li could not. He was thinking about the words and said, "Go and pour half a cup of hot water, and then add half a cup of cold water, and that's almost it." What answered him was Pei Zinan's cold and faint gaze, which made Li Qingming almost shrink back, fearing that the witch would draw her sword and chop him down in the next second. But it doesn't matter. If he is really killed, it will be Li Qingming in the future. What does it have to do with me now? The two looked at each other for a long time, and finally ended with Li Qingming's victory declared. Pei Zinan usually always told you to go east, but she must go west. This time, she really obeyed Li Qingming's orders. As a result, Li Qingming felt that his title of injured patient was really useful, and he was so bold that when Pei Zinan brought him half a cup of hot water and half a cup of cold water, he still found fault in saying, "It's still a little colder." Quote. At this time, Pei Zinan finally lost his temper, and his eyes were so cold that Li Qingming was also a little frightened. He could only bite the bullet and explain, "My body is injured. It can easily irritate if it's too cold or too hot." Pei Zinan didn't even blink, as if he was watching an extremely low-quality performance. Li Qingming's scalp went numb when he stared at her, and he fell silent as he spoke. The atmosphere became more and more silent, so silent that Li Qingming even trembled a little, but just when he felt a little sweaty, he suddenly saw Pei Zinan pick up the cup and take a sip of the spiritual spring. Then he blocked his lips directly. Li Qingming wanted to struggle, but how could he find the strength? Pei Zinan could only be allowed to do whatever he wanted. After a long while, Pei Zinan slowly stood up and stared at Li Qingming condescendingly, his tone indifferent but with a little bit of unnoticeable nervousness. She asked, Li Qingming, are you satisfied now? I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.